Hello, and welcome to another episode of History of Westeros podcast, a podcast dedicated to George R. R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire book series, as well as HBO's Game of Thrones. Today's episode is dedicated to the recently released The World of Ice and Fire. This is our general first impressions, things that stood out to us. We've only had a couple of days, a little bit longer than most of you to read it, as Target was selling these early. Like a full
Thanks,
9 days early they were selling it, so they're not quite as first as the rest of you.
Yeah, and I'm excited. We got our books at a great deal. Shay got hers at Target with 30% off. We
each got one right here.
We've
nice.
got our double action here.
Yeah.
I pre-ordered a copy in February 2013 because the book was originally supposed to be out last year, and the cool thing about that was I got the book for $15.50 which is like 70% off because of that pre-order price. So.
Yeah.
Go me.
I suppose this is a good place to talk about right here is just some of the differences between the different, the UK version and the US version.
Yeah.
The US version, as you saw, is this reddish orange color, and it's got it's like a nice cushiony kind of cover. The cover is non-removable. It's not a dust jacket or anything like that. Whereas the UK edition, which you might have seen the cover for that as well, is a black cover. And are people in the UK Blackfires or something?
Apparently.
Yeah. But and it's removable, and when you remove it, it's got like a dragon on the cover and like gold foil. I'm very happy we're in the US right about now because this is feels like a hefty, hardy book.
Yeah, I wish we had a version of the UK
version
we
could
to
show
hold
you
up and compare. But and anyway, the outside of the book is, of course, only a small detail. What matters is what's on the inside. And given how much we and you all love the backstory, legends, myths, and far-flung places in the world George R. R. Martin has provided for us, the World of Ice and Fire is kind of like a gift from the gods in a way. And now we have a lot more gods to add to the pile there now that we have this book. So sometimes piecing together a Song of Ice and Fire history requires picking obscure references and tying them together, grabbing like a sentence from one book and another sentence from another book, and just piecing that together. Well, here we just have entire sections all put together, just about specific historical topics, things we've been wanting to know for a while, and just I just can't even name all the different possibilities. But it's so wonderful to have everything in one place, even though we still have plenty of questions left unanswered. This answers so many new questions. It also creates a few new ones, but it's a great book, and we're really happy with it. And not just the text, though.
Yeah, this is the first time we've had so much really great art in one place that's also really accurate. I mean, there are the Art of Ice and Fire books. There's 2 volumes of that out, and there are the yearly calendars, which has one artist do each calendar.
So not taking anything away from that. Those are awesome.
Yeah. But a lot of those pieces suffer from being inaccurate. But I just have to say, some of the pieces in the World of Ice and Fire are also inaccurate, but some of them are more accurate, and a little more thought went into some of them than is usual, I think. One of the artists that's in the World of Ice and Fire, Magali Villeneuve, I think is how you say it.
I think it's Villeneuve because she's French.
Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I just read it as more like Spanish.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. Anyways, Magali is one of the artists in the World of Ice and Fire. She did some great pieces. She's maybe one of the ones in there the most. She did the Mistresses of Aegon IV and the Wives of Maegor pictures. She also did one of my favorite pieces, which is the one of Maria Martell and Rhaenys. One of her best pieces in there, I think. But she's doing the 2016 A Song of Ice and Fire calendar. She's going to be the first female artist to do so, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Next year is Donato Giancola.
Yeah. Certainly.
Which we already have. It comes out early, obviously. We got that one, which is pretty cool as well. But he did not do any for this. Ted Nasmith, who did, I think it was the 2011 calendar. All those castles that I'm sure you've all seen, very, very popular images, well deserved. He did a lot of pieces for this. Some of those pieces are just in it, but some of them are new pieces by him in here.
The art is all in the back. It's nicely cataloged, too.
Yeah.
You can look in the back, and there's an appendix of which artist did what on which page. So you can easily reference You can make comparisons between the different artists, and it's nicely organized that way.
Yeah, but like we said, this art should still not just be taken as being accurate. It's not all accurate. One thing, for instance, Magali, her Tywin has blue eyes. Tywin is clearly described as having green eyes many times. That's just a whoops, but just
some of the dragon
cases,
colors.
Dragon colors, horse
whatever.
colors sometimes. It's minor, but there is one, a little bit of a light on the art in the book for me, which is there's a Dragonstone piece done by Philip Straub.
Right at the beginning.
Right at the beginning. It's the first end paper, the full, like in the cover. It's one of those. It's just a nice Dragonstone piece. It had been seen before the book came out. It's the opening thing. Of course, people were going to see it and take a picture of it. And someone with a far more discerning eye than I did noticed that it was made with manipulated Skyrim dragons and Orthanc from Lord of the Rings.
It looks like it's
there's no denying it. Like, it's clearly. So, I mean, image manipulation is an art form, but I can't imagine that he asked for permission from Skyrim and from Lord of the Rings. So that's a little disappointing, but that's just, one piece in the whole book.
There was also recently a talk, a 92Y talk that was hosted by Tumblr. Of course, the moderator, when she announced it in front of everybody, called it Twitter.
Yeah,
that must have been embarrassing.
Yeah, that's hilarious. Too funny. But there were some cool little things.
A lot of cool detail from that. It
was a better interview than most, but still, interviews with George are rarely very good.
Yeah,
they ask questions.
They just asked bad questions. Yeah, the moderator, unfortunately, seems like she didn't prepare very well. She didn't know how to pronounce certain names, like literally basic names. Like, she didn't even know how to pronounce Clegane.
Yeah.
I mean,
or sigil.
Yeah, or sigil.
She said sigil. But,
which is, we're nitpicking, but we really would, we would really prefer to see good questions get asked.
Yeah.
Not that many good questions were asked. But, on the other hand, George is really good at digressing, and he would take some of these questions that weren't very interesting and make the answers interesting. So, good on George for turning the situation around. It was very good overall. We're complaining a little bit, but
like I said,
it was great.
It's a much better interview than is normally the case. Normally, like, who's your favorite character? And at least that wasn't asked.
Yeah, that's true. And in fact, George talked about the art a lot. He talked about how some of the same things we just said, about how it was more accurate in general. And in fact, he mentioned Ted Naismith as perhaps the most accurate. That was maybe off the top of his head, but that certainly means something.
Yeah. He said that with regards to his own imagination and the books themselves, he probably gave him more direction back then. Now,
Harper had originally asked him for about 50,000 words for The World of Ice and Fire, and he wrote 6 times that. Nice 300,000. The book itself only has about 180K, so there's a good 120,000, close to half of what he wrote that didn't make the book. So there's still a lot out there. We know that's not just in the trash. So we'll actually have a little more about that missing material later.
It's very hard to accept.
Yeah.
There's all these words that are out there, they're written, they're there, and we don't have them. But
one great funny thing that came up was George getting the question of what his house would be, and the answer turned out to be House Martin. Deadline. What deadline?
Very
That's
good.
a good one.
Yeah.
And what else do we have?
We have that he said that the ink blots that we maybe had mentioned before and that maybe you had heard of before, that they said they were going to have ink blots to, cover up things about Summerhall or just certain things they didn't want to spoil, they didn't want to go into. They would have it as if that had been spilled. But he said that they thought that readers would think they got a defective copy, so they cut the ink blots, which is too bad.
Yeah, that is too bad.
Yeah.
But it's still, they had to do what they had to do.
Yeah, I like the idea of that. They talked about it for a long time in advance of the book coming out about those ink blots. But
now, a couple more things before we get involved in the text itself. One thing is that the book itself, of course, we're not going to be able to cover everything in it. We're going to do a lot of, this is an overview. This is not as detailed or heavily researched as a lot of our other episodes, but we certainly didn't, we certainly prepared plenty for it in the same way. But it's not, we didn't write out a whole long script for this one. This is more of a discussion episode, which we're going to do maybe a little more often. We're not going to cut back on our heavy detail-oriented episodes where we get really in-depth on subjects. But we're going to try to add some more of these We're making more of a focus on this on the podcast in general in our life. And moving forward, we expect to be putting out more episodes. Of course, I've said that before, but this time there's a lot of circumstances that make that different. So, without getting into too much detail with that, because that's not what we're here for, thanks for tuning in today. And of course, you can still support the History of Westeros podcast with a donation. Go to historyofwesteros.com and click on donate. We're looking at, as we've described in our very recently published Battle of Ice 3 episode, we're expanding on ways to help the show, and we'll have some announcements with that soon. But it's only been a few days since we recorded the Battle of Ice, so we haven't finished all that up yet. There was an AMA, Ask Me Anything, on Reddit with Linda and Elio. And,
yeah, they talked a bit about, it's anime, so they just got asked questions. It wasn't quite an AMA, it was more of a, people ask anything, and then the moderators choose the question, the top questions, and then they
ask anything, but you want to get it answered.
But they talked a bit about the theories that they personally subscribe to and theories that they dislike. They, of course, threw shade at the bolt-on theory,
right,
and the Howland Reed. It's a theory that, Roose like a vampire, and we
joked about that one in the last episode.
Yeah,
too.
It's got a nice name at least.
I actually really appreciate Linda and Elio killing some of these theories like that, because I've said before that I think theory making is fun, and no one should ever just get mad at somebody else for coming up with their own theories. That just defeats the purpose of having fun with your favorite series. But that doesn't mean we have to take them all seriously either and think, oh, this deserves to be taken, we think this is a legitimate chance of it happening. Some of these theories are just pure fun. Some of them actually have a chance to be accurate. And so they knocked off a lot of these ones. Of course, they don't know for sure. Yeah. It's not like they've talked to George about all these specifically. But they're as big of an authority as you can get on the material besides George himself. And pretty much every theory they, threw shade on, I agreed with.
Yeah, I was like, of course.
I don't subscribe to any of those theories that were killed off.
But yeah, they specifically poked fun at the Howland Reed is the High Septon theory, as well as all of those terrible mythology theories.
Yeah, I want to say something about that. Some of those mythology theories aren't terrible in their detail, but in their conclusions.
Okay, yeah. Few of the theories are terrible in their detail. To have a theory, you have to come up with the detail. It's that they make these conclusions just not really thinking about the series as a whole. It doesn't make sense from any perspective for George to have just made Jaime Lannister compare exactly like this,
Yeah, you can only take those things so far. The comparisons are fun. Again, if you like that theory, go ahead, enjoy it. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with enjoying it in the least. You should have fun with whatever you want to have fun with. But as far as trying to look at it seriously and say, is this accurate?
As far as commenting on everything online, telling people about the theory, I don't know about that. That's pretty annoying to me. And the mythology people comment on everything.
Yeah.
But they also said they didn't think the Clegane Bowl theory was really going anywhere. That's, of course, the theory that Gregor Clegane, as Sir Robert Strong, will fight Sandor Clegane, for Cersei's
trial. Yeah, we've said the same thing. We just don't see how that could happen because
it's cool.
Sandor is too injured, too far away. Things are happening.
And why would he even be suggested? That's besides the point. The main point is that how would he even be able to fight this guy? Like, it would just be a slaughter if they even let him do it. So that
doesn't mean they won't have some sort of reckoning down the line as far as them fighting in this trial.
Yeah.
But we are getting off topic already, so let's get back into it. Some more of the stuff about the AMA real quick.
Yeah, they had a nice quote where they said that Paris, George's wife, told them that he was writing like a man possessed. Westeros was just coming to life in his head, which is certainly nice to hear.
Yeah, it's really awesome.
Yeah, I love that. I'm like,
people who thought that some people have complained that he even did this book, saying that he should be spending time on the main series. Well, if this stuff just came pouring out of him like that, well, that just goes to show. A lot of times the main series can't just, it's a lot more complicated.
And that's just not how creativity works. If you feel you really want to be writing about something and you just work on something else, you're going to just not do your best work.
That happens with us just writing our own topics. Yeah. We're not even inventing these topics ourselves, obviously. We're touching on topics that already exist in Westeros and elsewhere. But as far as which ones we have ideas on and which ones we're able to put to paper in a fluid way. Yeah. That's why we talk about having so many different episodes that we're working on, because that's really true. We have this stash of Google Docs that have all these different half-completed, third-completed, maybe just some notes, and some of them are just like 2 sentences long, and some of them are like many, many pages waiting to be made into an episode. So,
yeah, when you were working on the Battle of Ice Part 3 in the World of Ice and Fire, we had it, and you were just, it's hard to focus on that when you just want to, work on the World of Ice and Fire.
It's very true.
But
unusual challenge there.
But yeah, another cool thing they talked about in the AMA was very early on that one of the planned illustrations that they had in the book would have been a Maester star chart showing the constellations as they exist in the setting, marking out the 12 houses of heaven, and so on. Which would be interesting. They got cut really early on, in the plan stage, but it was just a cool little detail that they were thinking about doing.
Yeah. So the book itself, the way it's presented, this is, most of you know this by now, but just in case, and to rehash, the book itself is an in-world history book. It's not a book where there's a narrator that just knows everything and can tell you every detail in history. This is a maester writing a book in Westeros, and he's collecting his sources from other material in Westeros and other places. And so there's conflicts, there's inconsistencies, there's, in some cases, there's flat out errors, and there's some cases that the maester says something really vague that we actually as readers know a lot more about, because that just fits. The maester shouldn't know these things. The maester shouldn't know some of these small details of what some of these POV characters were thinking, because that's only open to us readers. That's not open to this particular maester. Maester Yandel is his name.
Yeah.
So there's also some interesting things that we notice, like how history can misrepresent somebody. A good example, just off the top of the head here, is Mace Tyrell. And the way that Mace Tyrell is presented in this book is as the Lord of Highgarden. He fought loyally for House Targaryen during Robert's Rebellion, and he was the only one to defeat Robert in a battle. Now, we've read the books. We know that really Randall Tarley, Samwell's father, was responsible for that victory, because Mace hadn't even gotten there by the time the battle was won. Yet Mace claimed credit for it, and so history gives him credit for it, because Mace is, a higher ranking lord than Randall Tarley. And so, in other words, we have characters that are painted as kind of heroic or successful, where we know the truth, they're kind of idiots. So you have to take everything you read with a grain of salt in this case.
Yeah.
These things are all from history. Some of these characters might be portrayed as amazing figures, but really they may have just been, the consequence of history, just the way it worked out, the circumstances. So that makes it, that creates a very realistic living history book that feels like, it feels authentic, even though it's in a fantasy world. But George, once again, shows how good he is at making a fantasy world real by taking the elements of the real world and porting them over into fantasy and keeping those while adding the fantastical elements in the background. So it's really fantastic. So real quick, again, before we get started, there are a couple of other formats this is in. It's not just in book form. Of course, there's an ebook, which, we already have that, of course. It's got the illustrations on it, too. They're obviously not as big if you're looking at them on an iPad or iPhone screen or any sort of smartphone or any tablet. It's not going to be as big and glorious as the book, but it's really good. The images are small, and you can click them and get bigger. Yeah, and you can even, there's being able to search through the book is amazing. That's, of course, that's a requirement for us, for searching for references and looking for, if we're looking for a certain name. I've already gone through the book and looked for every mention of Lomas Longstrider and Septon Barth, for just to name a couple. And we're building those for future episodes. And how impossible would that be if I had to pour through each book and just look for the title, without that e-copy? It would
when I first got it, the first thing I did was I made a list of things that I wanted to just search in the book to see what was mentioned, like Nymeria, But I also looked up stuff like Queen, just because I was just curious about certain aspects. But yeah, Lomas Longstrider's a good one. Later on, we pulled all the mentions about this black stone, this oily black stone, which was essential for us to be able to look up black stone.
Yeah, so we have a lot of these topics that we've just given an overview on here. And of course, the book is also available in audio form. I've already listened to it through once that way, and I've read the book through once that way. And plan on continuing to listen to it over and over. It's about 22 hours of audio The main audio is read by none other than Roy Dotrice, who a lot of you know from the audiobooks. Some of you don't like Roy Dotrice, and I can kind of understand that because he's been asked to do voices that are hard for an older man to do, like young girls. They really need to have a female narrator. But this is just straight history.
No.
There's no voices. He's doing his natural voice, and it's perfect. And he's got a great historian narrator type voice. I love it. And the sidebars. Now, the sidebars are little small tidbits of history that appear, in the side of certain pages, or in the center as a kind of a subtopic within whatever main topic is being discussed at the time. Those are read by a different person. I forgot to look up his name. Yeah, he has a much different voice.
I was curious how they did that. Do they just finish a section and then say sidebar? Do they do anything? How do they do
it? It just stops, pauses, and the guy starts talking, and it's clearly a different person. His voice is very
But it cuts
different.
it off like in the middle of a.
No, there's always a sentence where it always ends in a good spot, and then the sidebar starts.
Yeah, I was very curious about that.
And the guy, it's funny, a regular listener / fan, Eintrone, on Twitter pointed out that this guy's voice sounds a bit like C-3PO.
Oh, yeah?
I have to agree with that. He does sound a little bit like C-3PO. But he has a good voice. That's not a negative. So I've really enjoyed listening to it, and I think you guys might too. We've just put up links on our front page. You can order it in audio form or in e-form.
Although if you're ordering it in audio form, they have that free...
That's true. Yeah. That's a good time to mention this. Pro tip here. If you have not tried audible.com, you can... Amazon is offering a free trial of Audible right now, and if you sign up, you don't pay anything for 30 days, and you can cancel before that. So... with that free trial, you get 3 free audiobook downloads, and when you know it, this one is available. So you can sign up for Audible and download, because they're owned by Amazon now. You can download the book for free in audio format and then never pay anything. So I couldn't resist that personally.
Yeah.
So if you're already a regular Audible user, well, sorry, you're just gonna have to buy it. But it's it's not nearly as expensive as the regular book, and you can get it through us. It won't cost any more. You can go order it through our website. It just gives us a little bit of a bonus for referring you to it. And like I said, it doesn't cost you any extra. So that's a good way to support the show.
And if you're buying the hard copy book, you can follow any of our links and get it that way. But we can't link it there. It just doesn't let us for some reason.
Yeah, probably just because it's such a hot item.
Yeah,
but still,
they don't need us to advertise it.
Yeah. But anyway... Let's get into some of our favorite things that we actually picked out, some of our favorite topics, some mysteries that were revealed, some new mysteries.
Well, first off, it's pretty clear the Long Night story, it exists in almost every culture.
Yeah,
a variant of it. It's like the flood, it's similar to flood stories in real life.
Right. Yeah, almost every major religion and culture has a flood story. The most popular one for us Westerners is the Noah and the Ark. Well, just about every culture in Planetos has some sort of version of the Long Night. They don't mention the others, except in Westeros, but they do mention fighting.
They mention a thing. They're fighting something, clearly.
It varies wildly from tale to tale, but they all tend to have the same general substance.
And some of them even mention, having Lightbringer.
Yes, exactly. There's there's various versions of Lightbringer and Azor Ahai. Yeah, and so that's really cool, united narrative there throughout the book. The Maester writing the book doesn't necessarily draw all that together, though. So that was left to us. But I think that even a casual reading would note that. It's really neat though to see that. So think about what that means. What does it mean that the Long Night affected everywhere? Was it just worse in Westeros? Well, George did mention in the 92Y interview that. Part of the reason Westeros, well, maybe it wasn't in the 92Y, but he said this. That part of the reason that winters are a bit worse in Westeros is because the continent is simply farther north. It's just higher up towards the pole, whatever. I don't know if they have a North Pole, but the equivalent of a North Pole. Westeros is just far closer to it than places in Essos. Braavos is about as far north as Essos gets until you get a lot farther east. And Braavos only lines up with about with some exceptions. There's the islands there, which are pretty far away. But yeah, so even if we look at Ib, though, Ib isn't as far north as even the Wall. So it's pretty close, though. So so that's pretty interesting that the Long Night just affected everybody, and even in some of these cultures that are old enough to have relatively intact histories, like ET. They even have stories about it. So
yeah, which is just so interesting
really
to me
neat.
when they talk about a hero there, because I can't help but wonder, wouldn't the stand have to have been over there for them to have had these stories? It really got me thinking. I don't have any conclusions to draw from it, except that it's weird to me that there would be like Hirkun the hero all the way over there who did his last stand all the way over there, unless that's like unless something like the Five Forts, which we'll get into more, is one of the like hinges of the world, and they did attack there, and that's why that wall. We'll get into it more. There's a almost 1,000-foot tall wall, which sounds a lot like the wall, except not ice. But I can't help but wonder, did they attack from that side as well? I just. Yeah, I
it's
don't
hard
know.
to tell. It's very tantalizing, but it reveals as much as it confuses, because and it should, because it's really, really, really ancient. There's no way these maesters could possibly have like eyewitness accounts of things that happened before there was writing. I mean, that's just not possible or even reasonable.
No.
So it's left to be just a great mystery that we get to think about.
Yeah.
There's also some notes related to that on the seasons. George has already outright said in interviews that the seasons have a magical explanation to them. That is actually touched on here. There is a new indication, something that George hadn't said before, that maybe the seasons weren't off. Maybe they were normal. And this may have been, whatever happened during the long night may have been what changed things semi-permanently to the state that they are now. Septon Barth, who I've already mentioned once, was the
Septon Barth.
he was the hand of the king for Jaehaerys, the old king, and he was hand for about 40 years. He was a common-born man, and he pretty much everything he says is accurate. That's something to look out for. I mean, I'm not saying that everything he says is definitely accurate, but the Maester doesn't agree with a lot of what he says. But he's been proven right so many times, and he was such a outstanding scholarly figure during his time. He's kind of like what a lot of us think about as Old Nan. Old Nan, we've come to find that a lot of what her old stories are true, if not exaggerated a bit, but they're at the core, they're true. And so Old Nan is almost like an oracle that you have to kind of decode what she's saying, but it's pretty accurate. Septon Barth is kind of similar. So I think we're going to do an episode on him.
Yeah, I would say that in general, if the Maester disagrees with something and thinks it's just wrong, that you should take a closer look at
especially
that
especially if it's related to magic.
Yeah,
because you know
especially
the Maesters are always
magic,
down on anything. They don't like to accept magical explanations so readily.
Yeah.
Which is good which would be fine, in the real world. But there really is lots of magic in Planetos, so you can't just dismiss that stuff out of hand. So personally, some of my favorite little miniature discoveries. I've been wanting to know what color Meraxes and Vagar were forever. So long. I almost burned my one Q&A question to George at Con Carolinas on what color is Vagar. I asked a different question, but I still want to know what color Vagar is, and unfortunately this book does not reveal it. But we got halfway there. Meraxes, green eyes, silver scales. That sounds really, really fascinating, really awesome, like beautiful, like silver scales. Green eyes. That's awesome. But unfortunately, none of the art in here depicts her that way. But she still looks really cool.
They say the artist just always does their dragons as having like kind of reddish wings.
Yeah.
But
the dragons do look really cool, but they're just not quite the right color. But that's okay. That's not a big deal.
Yeah.
Okay. Some of these things we're going to come out. We just got some random tidbits and things we're going to get into more seriously. But here's a cool one. House Blackwood. They were originally, we know that they're one of the, if not the only southern house that keeps to the old gods. They didn't originate in the south, though. They originated in the north. Then they may have controlled what is now the Wolfswood. Blackwood, that area of the Wolfswood is where they held sway, and it seems likely enough to me that when they were chased out of the north, which is what happened, they were defeated and then kind of exiled or banned or fled the north and settled where they are now in what they call Blackwood Vale. Well, it's not really, the woods at Blackwood Vale aren't where they get their name from. So we think that the Wolfswood used to be named the Blackwood, and when the Starks kind of took it over, it either got renamed the Wolfswood by just the people that live there, or the Starks officially changed the name or something.
This is an ominous name, Blackwood.
Not that Wolfswood is a whole lot better.
Yeah,
but it is better.
It's better than Blackwood, but yeah.
And we tried to, there's some other mysteries that we tried to look for, like just random little things like, say, how long did Lord Rickard rule? Lord Rickard being Ned's father. And that helps us piece together things like how long did Edwile, his father, rule, which helps us piece together other things like names and dates and who did what. Sometimes it's hard to explain how a certain detail leads us to something else, but that is how it works. And we weren't able to figure out when Rickard took over as Lord of Winterfell, but we did know we can see that he was Lord at least as far back as 262, which is just after the War of Nine Penny Kings, and about 3 years after Summerhall. And I certainly would like to know more about that, but we'll have to maybe wait for another time.
Yeah. Me personally, some of my favorite sections were on those far off regions. A lot of it really very ancient stuff, but that's the most new to us, like completely new stuff, and it just gives me a lot to think about. But I particularly liked this kingdom of Sarnor, which was well described in all the various the cities within it, where we have Sarnath with the palace of 1,000 rooms and the tall towers, which sounds pretty cool. All these Sar and Sa names, hard to keep them straight. But Sathar, the waterfall city, which the art of Sathar, it shows the Dothraki coming after it. But they don't show any waterfalls in the art, so I'm not sure if what Waterfall City means. It's just incorrect art. I myself picture the Waterfall City from Dinotopia, for those of you who know that series. My favorite of the cities mentioned, though, was Salosh by the Silver Shore, with its great library, which is pretty clearly, similar to Alexandria. Especially as we have this quote, for scholars and students of history, the fall of Salosh by the Silver Shore was especially tragic, for when that city of scholars burned, its great library was not spared, and most of the history of the tall men and the peoples who had gone before them were lost for all time. Tragic. Truly tragic.
They rode coal black horses, but the greatest warriors had scythed chariots with blood red horses. And the scythed chariots are, that's a real world thing. Those existed back in as far back as ancient Egypt. They were also on the battlefields against when the Persian kings fought Alexander the Great. And so that's pretty cool. Of course, they were actually very easy to deal with once people figured out the strategy, but that's a whole nother topic.
But it's not depicted in the art. The horses just kind of look like normal horses. They're not coal black or blood red.
They're just horses.
They're just horses. But it is cool that women drove chariots as well. Gender equality, or at least a closer version than Westeros. We can't be sure exactly how equal it really was. I'm sure it wasn't really that equal.
Right.
But they at least went to war together, which reminds me of the Rhoynar and Dorne. So I can't help but wonder what if the Sarnor and Rhoynar. There's some connection there.
Well, basically, they weren't ruled. They didn't follow the religion of the Seven, which is very patriarchal.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big part of it. It's it's like there's cultural.
Yeah.
And of course, the Andals are the main purveyors of culture in Westeros. So, we also have other far off regions like Leng and Yiti, which are very Asian in feel. There's a lot of China.
Leng is really tall.
In there,
they have that illustration.
Yeah, there's some illustrations
woman.
of the average looking.
You can't. Of course, they couldn't resist saying all the women are amazingly beautiful, long-legged, beautiful. That's the.
Are they now?
Yeah, all of them, every single one. But yeah.
And there's this ancient empire or region or something
the kingdom of Hirkun.
Is the patrimony of Hirkun.
The patrimony, that's true, the patrimony.
And their last remnants of the patrimony of Hirkun are still existing now.
Daenerys sees some warrior maids from Bayasabad,
Kayana and Samiriana, and they wear rubies in their cheeks.
And
she takes care of that, and iron
rings in their nipples.
And they're a warrior. They're all badass. Maybe some sort of a nod to the Amazons or something. Or
pretty clearly. I think a nod.
Why not just have warrior women?
It's kind of funny. It looks like my notes were removed about it. Oh no, it wasn't. 99 of every 100 men in these regions are gelded.
Only a few men are worthy of
becoming the great fathers, as they're called. But Lomas Longstrider himself tells us that there are no fiercer fighters on all the earth than these all-female warriors that these places have, which is pretty neat. Other cool sections that we liked. Obviously, the story of Castamere, which we got to hear him read himself. at Con Carolina's.
Right?
So it wasn't exactly new to us, but it's still an outstanding part of the book.
Yeah, to correct our little whatever things we got wrong in our notes.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, it's just utterly brutal about drowning them.
Now, there's also some great stories about the Ironborn. The Grey King, of course, we know he killed Naga, but there's a really cool little quote that one of our listeners, Bill Davis III, pointed out. He pointed out to us that the Grey King carved the first longship from the, quote, hard pale wood of Ygg, YGG, which is a nod to the Scandinavian earth tree of life called Idrigizil. Same spelling, YGG, but without the Idrigizil, just the YGG. This is a quote, continuing the quote, a demon tree who fed on human flesh. Well, listeners to our Werewoods episodes note the similarity between the notion of offering blood sacrifice to a tree and the concept of a tree that fed on human flesh. It's easy to see how the distortion of history could take offering blood and body parts to a heart tree as seeing as the tree having eaten it. Which is really interesting because we're told that there weren't any werewoods or children on the Iron Islands, but of course we've hypothesized that maybe the Naga's ribs were potentially werewoods as well. That's not necessarily a super strong theory, but it's certainly possible. Maybe the Grey King carved this longship from a werewood on land. He doesn't have to have carved it from the Iron Islands.
Yeah, I never considered that it was. Yeah, they made a longship out of werewood, and then that's the remnants.
That's possible.
But I'm not really clear on how
well, they're definitely looks like. Well, they're definitely coming up out of the ground like ribs.
Yeah.
But but it's a good point though. If a ship was carved out of werewood, I think we talked about this briefly before. Yeah. It would eventually turn to stone. Yeah. Wouldn't be very useful as a ship. No such thing as a stone ship that works.
So where'd that stone go exactly?
Yeah. So if this ship was really existed, well, it's probably at the bottom of the ocean itself. Perhaps it's in the Grey King or in the Drowned God's watery halls itself. Yeah. He's still riding it down there.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, there was some. We're gonna talk about just some cool names and little tidbits, and we're just talking about little things that stood out to us. But we find out who the wife of Viserys II was, Lara Rogare. I just love that name. I'm crazy about it. It just rolls off the tongue really well. It just sounds cool. Yeah, she was from Lys.
We got some art of her as well.
We got art of her as well. She maybe wasn't the best person. I don't know what the circumstances are, but she did just ditch out on her family, just left to go back there. But maybe she didn't like Westeros. She was worried there. People were threatening her. Who knows? We don't know the story.
Maester doesn't know the whole story.
But maybe she just didn't want to have her take care of her kids anymore. Who knows? Yeah. So, but yeah, she was cool. There was Sabbath of Viperin, who was fond of killing men and kissing women. She was the wife of Lord Forrest Frey, which seems to me, they talk about she was like an old harridan and how she had a sharp tongue, and it seems to me that she was likely an ancestor of Walder Frey. It just seems like they threw that in there as she's similar to him a little bit.
We can't know exactly, but she would roughly be his great grandmother, something like that.
Yeah,
maybe just great grandmother. But if she's even his ancestor at all, but she probably is.
Yeah, I think so. Just based on their description of her, it seems like they're referencing her sharp tongue.
We also have Sir Joffrey Doggett.
Mm-hmm. The Red Dog, which is funny since, Joffrey has his dog, Sandor. Mm-hmm. Yep.
There's actually several Joffreys that come up. It seems to be a name that originates from the Stormlands, but there's certainly other Joffreys around, including, anyone who's read The Princess and the Queen knows, there was a Joffrey Valyrian who was basically a Targaryen.
Yeah, a lot of Joffreys, though.
Yeah, there's several of them.
And then there's the Muppet Tullys.
The Muppet Tullys.
Yeah, we have Elmo, Kermit, and Grover.
Mm-hmm. And this is around the time of the Dance of the Dragons, in fact.
Yeah. So
it's too bad they didn't get a mention in The Princess and the Queen. They may have been edited out of it. They may have been in there and just didn't make the final cut. Because as we know, that book or that short story was cut severely down.
Severely.
To size.
But yeah, I have a friend who particularly loves the Tullys. Everyone comes up with, this is my house, this is my favorite house. Well, her house is House Tully. She posted immediately after getting the book saying that George was turning her favorites into even bigger jokes than they already are. And she's like, stop it! And then she got a little further and she saw another Muppet Tully. She's like, ah. And then she also said that she likes to picture Elmo Tully talking in the third person. and, Elmo is fighting for Queen Rhaenyra. Stuff like that.
The one saving grace there is that all three of these Tullys seem to be, formidable in their own way. None of them were jokes.
One of them even got a piece of art. Elmo.
That's true.
So.
And one of them slew an important Baratheon lord. So that's pretty good. They may have goofy names, but their deeds were noble enough.
But we also have a Rhea Stark in the Stark
look
family
at the back
tree.
of the Stark. There's a Stark family tree, a Lannister family tree, and a Targaryen family tree that goes back a bit, and each of them go back, several generations, 8, 9, 10 generations. The Targaryen one is all the way back to Aegon the Conqueror, so it's even more generations. But there's a Rhea Stark who appears, and we know we were pretty sure we know what that's a reference to.
Yeah, George's assistant, Rhea Golden, who's an amazing artist.
Really?
She has a website. She did the Meat House Man for George.
And she's done art.
She's been
for...
Hugo nominated. I don't know if she won. I didn't check, but
she's also done art for the card game.
Yeah. Anyways, Rhea Golden. I think that's pretty clearly her.
Same spelling. In the book here,
same spelling.
That's
Rhea
probably a nod to
Stark.
her. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like as well. Interestingly enough, Rhea the same letters as Arya.
Very true.
But yeah.
Just switch that A and R, or move the back A to the front. It works a lot two different ways.
Yeah.
So we also have other names that are maybe hallmarks to their later ancestors, or in some cases stand stark contrasts. For example, Savage Sam Tarly.
Yeah.
Sounds like the exact opposite of.
Yeah, well,
Our
it makes you
Tarly.
think that's pretty clearly what Randall was naming, or maybe there's another Samuel Tarly named after again, but it would make sense for Randall Tarly to name his son after Savage Sam Tarly,
a famous ancestor.
Who, when fighting the Dornishmen, got Heartsbane red, apparently, from tip to hilt.
It's probably safe to guess that there have been several Samuel Tarlys over the years.
Yeah, certainly.
The history of House Tarly goes back a long way, too, so they have plenty of time. Plenty of Tarlys have been born and died, and only one
there was also
of has gone off to the wall.
There was a Samwell Dane, a Samwell Starfire, which is funny because there's, Reach and Dorne, and they still have Samwell. But
there's some bleeding over of naming there, but we've seen that before. There's a Theon Stark, and obviously there's a Theon Greyjoy.
Yeah, we have Sathos San.
Sathos San, a lot of A's, a lot of double A's in there, and Sathos
I wonder,
San.
it's interesting. The Sathos San, Soth is one of the cities in Sarnor.
Yeah,
exactly without the oaths.
Yeah, but of course the Sans are from Lys, so I guess. It might just be coincidence. Or
coincidence.
Some sort of cultural overlay that we're not aware of.
Yeah, some
there.
language thing that I don't know, means something. I don't know.
This guy apparently would be just an ancestor of Salador. We're not sure how far back this would go, but it seems to be from the reference. Without having it right in front of me, I'm pretty sure it's pretty far back.
Yeah.
So the Sans apparently have been a pirate family for quite a while, a pirate dynasty. So. That's pretty neat. I like that idea.
Yeah, the Reach section was a particularly good section, I thought. I really liked the stuff about
there were
the children.
A few surprises in there, weren't there?
Yeah, there was some cool stuff. I liked the stuff about the children of Garth Greenhand. As we knew, he had a lot of children. He was bountiful,
bountiful harvest of children. A bumper crop of kids.
Yeah. Some of my favorites. For one, there was a lot of nice female ancestors for these houses. All of his children, well, not all of his children, but most of his children started these houses in the Reach. One of them was Floris the Fox. Which she was just really hilarious to me. She was referred to as the cleverest of Garth's children, and she kept 3 husbands, each ignorant of the existence of the others.
Which is really hard to pull off. A man pulling off multiple wives is one thing, but how does a woman go from
children?
Exactly, she's pregnant. Like, this is yours. No, this is yours. She tells all 3 of them that this is
your son is just gonna. I'm just gonna send him off somewhere.
Yeah, he's not gonna live here. But
but from her son sprang House Florent, House Ball, and House Peak, which is so.
Those are all very major houses.
Yeah,
even though some of them have fallen since then.
Very foxy lady there, but we also had
nothing like Celise Florent, right?
No.
She's not so foxy.
We had Maris the maid, the most fair, which I had to wonder, is that a reference to Pretty Maris? It is spelled differently. It's spelled M-A versus M-E, but Maris the most fair and Pretty Maris, I can't, that's a cruel joke, yeah. But maybe that's why they call her Pretty Maris as well. Maybe it's even more of a joke than we would think, that they know of Maris the maid, And
Pretty Maris is from Westeros, after
yeah,
all, so
and
this
so
is certainly possible.
it's interesting. But she married Uthor of the High Tower, so Maris the Maid is one of the ancestors of all the High Towers.
That's right. We also have Rose of Red Lake, who is apparently a skin changer,
Yeah.
and she is the originator of House Crane. So are we supposed to believe that she skin changed into a crane?
Yeah, that's what it says. She skin changed into a
That's
crane.
pretty cool.
So I wonder if anyone in House Crane, does
Occasionally
that.
skin changer, blah, blah, blah.
Or
they
if
probably
that's
abandoned
yeah.
the worship of the old gods
Yeah.
and lost all that.
Yeah, maybe that's funny. But yeah, or maybe it could be a case of just that's one of the false cases that she wasn't really a skin changer.
Yeah,
perhaps.
it could just be a tale.
And
exactly.
just a tale. There are skin changers, so we take it to be more true, but it is
we
just
can't
a tale.
dismiss it, yeah.
This one was really funny to me. Rowan Goldtree, who wrapped an apple in her golden hair and planted it. I don't know why she just chose to do that.
That's a kind of a random thing to do, but it
yeah,
worked.
she was doing it because a guy, the man she was in love with wanted to be with a richer woman, and so it worked. And she grew a golden apple tree, and she originated House Rowan of Golden Grove. But it's just, really weird story to me.
And the Rowans are very powerful. They're one of the preeminent houses in the
Do you think they have the gold
top
tree?
five.
Golden Grove? Maybe.
Well, that would explain some of their wealth.
Yeah.
You could say money doesn't grow on trees. Well, maybe it grows on this tree. Okay, that's not very likely. We also have Ellen Eversweet, who is the originator of House Beesbury and the first known beekeeper in Westeros. So that's cool.
Which is cool. Yeah, it is very cool. I'm fond of House Beesbury because of the Beesbury that was in The Princess and the Queen.
Yes, with his waspish tone.
Yeah, exactly. I like the Beesburys. But yeah, that's there's also a lot of great men, children, but we just wanted to give a little overview, and the women were a little bit funnier tales to me, to be honest. The hair thing.
But staying on, this was not intentional, but sticking to women here, we have a really cool note about some later characters. One example is Visenya, as in the Visenya Targaryen, Aegon's elder sister wife, who had a lot more to do with both the conquest and the rule of the realm than we thought. And we already thought she had a lot more to do than was said. One particularly important thing she did was, it was not just her idea to form the Kingsguard, but she had to really push Aegon to accept the idea, because he was a little casual about his own safety. He didn't think it was a real thing to be that worried about. And Visenya had one or two clever ways of showing Aegon that no, you're not as safe as you think you are. And you guys will enjoy reading those.
Yeah, we won't say much about it.
Yeah, we're not trying to give away too many spoilers here.
Yeah.
We're giving an overview. We're mentioning some things you guys might not notice, but some of you guys who are listening maybe haven't had a full chance to digest the material. So we're not gonna just reread what's already in the book for you.
Yeah,
so
that was
that's
actually
kind of
an interesting discussion we had, is what is a spoiler and what's too much of a spoiler. And we you'll notice by the time we get to the end that we kind of separated things. We have things more related to the current series that are more spoilery, and as far as we can approximate what a spoiler is at the end. So if you care about not hearing like the implications of certain bits in the World of Ice and Fire with regards to current theories, then you just don't want to watch the last segment.
Yeah, we'll warn
let
you when you get to when we get to it. But yeah, we've saved the revelations for the main series, as in things that pertain to our main characters and main plot lines, rather than just historical tidbits. Those we saved for last, because there's not a lot, but there are a few very important details, clues / revelations that affect A Song of Ice and Fire proper as a whole in interesting ways. So we're going to save that for last. So just in case anyone doesn't want to hear those things and wants to figure them out on their own, come back and listen to the last part some other time. But moving on, how about another great thing we got was, anyone who's read The Princess and the Queen and Rogues knows that the story does not end with the end of the Dance of the Dragons. It ends with basically the end of Queen Rhaenyra. And that is not nearly the end of the Dance of the Dragons. It continues for quite a while after that. So the history book wraps that up for us nicely. Not only does it detail the several events that didn't make the book, but it details the completely missing end of the Dance of the Dragons and the very tumultuous time afterwards. It was a bunch of regents that that had control for a while. It was like a revolving door of regents and hands, and King Aegon III was a really interesting guy. He was a really melancholy, sad kind of guy, and that's just a great, really interesting time period. There was also a really nasty winter around then. So there is a lot to say about that. You guys will be very pleased with the wrap up of that, and not having to wait, to find out the ending of the Dance with the Dragon some other time. It's only a year after The Princess and the Queen came out, we get these answers. That's not so in George R. R. Martin time, that's not bad.
Yeah.
We also have a character that appears in The Princess and the Queen, appears throughout history again, but you might not realize that he's the same character because he acquires a nickname, and maybe you didn't make this connection. Alan Oakenfist, who was mentioned several places throughout the world of Ice and Fire because he was really prominent in his era. He was extremely crucial in Daron the First's conquest of Dorne. That's the young dragon, and he also had some important relationships that had an impact on the Targaryen dynasty. This is the same Alan of Hull who tried to tame the dragon Sheepstealer and was later legitimized by the sea snake Corlys Velaryon, who, of course, also has a lot to do with the Princess and the Queen and the events afterwards. He's a major player.
Yeah, he's a great character.
Just in general, he's really interesting.
Traveled the world.
Let's talk about him.
Yeah.
He's a huge part of this book. He's almost as important as Lomas Longstrider. I didn't actually do a very good job of explaining who Lomas Longstrider was, but
true.
In case you don't know, he's basically a scribe who traveled the world and just wrote down everything he could about all these incredible places. He cataloged 9 wonders built by mankind and 7 natural wonders, kind of similar to our world.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I was doing with that list, was trying to pick out all the wonders of the world, and whether natural or not, and see how many of them are actually mentioned. They're not all mentioned, but many of them are. But next to him, probably the most important explorer from Westeros is Corlys Velaryon. And he gets his name, the Sea Snake, from one of his ships that was named the Sea Snake, and that was where he did his most important voyages. And boy, he went far.
Wait.
He went really far.
Are you telling me that they don't call him that because he sees a lot of snakes?
I'm telling you that, yes.
Wow, that's mind blowing.
And what's also cool is that he has a predecessor named Corlys Velaryon. Wow, same name, funny that, who was in the first Kingsguard. So I assume that Corlys may have been named for some other great Corlys Velaryon before him, but it's possible that this Corlys the Sea Snake was named for this first Kingsguard member.
True.
So that's really neat.
Yeah, we also got should we move forward?
Yeah.
We got some long-awaited details on Aegon the Fifth's children and wife.
That's Egg, in case you didn't know.
From the Duncan Egg. First off, his wife, Betha Blackwood of Blackwood.
Yeah, how about that?
That's my new URL on Tumblr.
And interestingly, Betha Blackwood is a contemporary of Melantha Blackwood, who is the wife of Willem Stark, who is Ned's great-grandfather or grandfather. I forget which. I don't have that in front of me, but it's either his grandfather or great-grandfather. Ned is Stark on both sides of his family, so it gets a bit confusing. I mean, we can look it up. We got the book right here.
Yeah, we do.
In any case, there's definitely going to be some more Blackwood theories popping up here and there, because the Blackwoods actually appear in a lot of people's family trees. They're in the Targaryen family tree. There's marriages there. There's Stark, so... I think we're gonna see a lot more theories about them. Grandmother?
Yeah.
Cool. So, and those also happened around the same time. Not just they aren't just contemporaries relative to each other. They're actually contemporaries in terms of what time period they were.
Yeah, interesting.
So
There's
the
also been
Blackwoods
other Blackwood marriages. There's even in the Stark family tree there was Black Alley Blackwood, which is funny because it's Black Betha and Black Alley. That was much farther back. But
and that,
still,
of course, is Black to Blackwood. That's
and
the Blackwoods are known for having black hair.
Raven black hair.
Raven black, yeah. So that goes.
So
good.
it makes sense.
What's interesting there is that wait, what was her name? No.
Which one?
The second one.
The Black Alley.
Black Alley, yeah, of course. Yeah. Black Alley was married to Cregan Stark, who was Lord of Winterfell during the Dance of the Dragons, and Cregan also plays a major role in the aftermath of the dance. You'll really enjoy reading the story about that. So. That's going to set up some serious theories. I'm sure some of them will be crackpot, but some of them will probably be really cool, and even the crackpot ones might be cool. But I predict a lot of Blackwood talk.
It already has been a lot. Blackwoods are all over it, really. We learned about Duncan. Of course, he married Jenny of Oldston. Before that, he was betrothed to a daughter of House Baratheon, of Lionel Baratheon. And this is
Duncan, Lord of Dragonflies.
Duncan the Small.
Duncan the Small, yes.
Yeah. And this causes Lionel to rebel, and Duncan fights him.
There's a really wonderful piece of art dedicated to that. And George in the 92Y interview said that it will be the scene there that you're seeing in that image when you if you've already got the book and seen it, or if you're going to get the book, when you see it, George estimated that event will happen in roughly the 7th or 8th Dunk and Egg story. So I'm glad to hear him say that he's thinking of writing that many of them. But of course we'll have to be patient for this. Yeah,
but there are 3 out right.
It sounds like the Dunk and Egg. It really sounds like the Dunk and Egg stories will continue. Will go all through both their lives and end with Summerhall because that's where they both die.
What a dark ending to such a more light-hearted story compared to the series. Like that's dark.
Yeah, it is really dark.
Everyone's dead.
Yeah. Everyone dies of Summerall, sorry.
But, anyways, to keep the peace, Egg agrees to marry Raelle to Lionel's heir. So that's how Raelle, his daughter, married into Baratheon.
Mm-hmm. That's Stannis' grandmother. And Robert's grandmother, Renly's.
Yeah. Interestingly, Jaehaerys, he was betrothed to Celia Tully, and Shara to Luther Tyrell, which, Betha Blackwood and Aegon were trying to, have ties all over the realm to keep the realm united, and they had all these great political ambitions, but their children just didn't listen to them, and Jaehaerys and Shara married each other. Instead, they were in love with each other, and they married each other at 14 and 15. So, they, slighted 2 more big houses, like the Baratheons were slighted, the Tullys, the Tyrells, which is, and then the other son, Daeron, was betrothed to Olenna, which was a big mystery for a long time.
Yeah, and she says that she put a stop to that, but it doesn't sound like that's the case.
It sounds like he did, but to me, I get the impression because Daeron was gay. He had a lover, Sir Jeremy Norridge, that he met at Highgarden when he was a squire there. But I got the impression that maybe it was more of a not Daeron, saying no to the match, but more of maybe Olenna and Daeron agreeing let's not do this. And so she couldn't. Maybe she wasn't just saving face there.
It
could have been a little more like that.
I feel like no matter what, Daeron wasn't going to marry her, and she didn't. It's not a mutual decision if one person is just dead set against it.
We don't know that no matter what, Daeron wasn't going to marry her. Maybe they both agreed. If we just say we're not going to marry, if you just say you're not going to marry me, then they won't make you marry me. I don't want to marry you. You don't want to marry me. Let's not do it. They were the same age, and he was a squire at Highgarden, and so maybe they had some contact, and they were able to say it. So,
in any case, it certainly doesn't appear to have been.
It doesn't appear
her
to just
decision
her
alone.
say no. It's not like she just cowed him and said, "You will say you will not marry me." That's
what's interesting is there's a parallel here to her own grandson, because this Daeron is a lot like Sir Loras. He was one of the finest knights of his era, and but also not interested in women at all.
Yeah.
So I guess she's got experience with that sort of thing.
But of course Luther was slighted. And Olenna was slighted, and they ended up marrying each other.
Yeah, they were both Targaryen rejects.
Although I have to say, it's interesting that Daeron was betrothed to Olenna Redwine. When they go for Tyrell, Tully, Baratheon, Redwine.
Well, I'm thinking by then the Redwines had maybe really risen to power as
they wanted some of that wine.
They certainly weren't huge long time back in the day, but they are huge now. Notice how important their fleet and their allegiance is to the War of the Five Kings and to the story going forward. So at some point, they got to this point of being wealthy and prominent. And it could be that, this certainly had to have happened before this marriage was considered possibility. The Red Wine Fleet is really, really important. It's the biggest or second biggest navy in all of Westeros these days. Wasn't always the case. For the longest time, the Valyrians had the biggest fleet in Westeros. In fact, the Valyrians were wealthier than the Lannisters for a little while. How about that?
Yeah, that's
crazy. Power really, that's one thing we learned a lot, is that you see these houses that have been in power for so long, and you think, well, a lot of this has been static. These houses have always been strong, these houses have always not. Well, that's not really the case. A lot of these houses have gotten powerful and then vanished, or they've gotten powerful and become small. They started off small, they were small for thousands of years, and they got big at some point. Just one event, one great leader, one set of circumstances, being on the right side of a war, getting the right merit, anything. Just all these different things have happened, maybe finding, getting your own Valyrian steel blade or something, having a famous ancestor, all these different things that can happen, and really, we've pretty much there's examples of all these different things I've just named throughout this book.
So those are just some of our immediate tidbits. We're going to get into a little more of that, but I also wanted to talk about...
a couple of minor things, a couple of criticisms.
Yeah, we're going to talk about a couple of criticisms.
Now, to be very clear, we love this book. Before we start criticizing anything.
Yeah.
But we're also detail hounds, and when we notice something, we're not going to just not point it out.
As we're going to tell a little bit later, stuff was cut.
Yeah, there's some things that were cut, but that,
so,
yeah, but first of all...
Anyways, I was most disappointed. I was most excited for, to be clear, I was most excited for the stuff on Dorne. Elio and Linda have said that Dorne was their favorite region. I expected it to be very good. When I talked to George at Con Carolinas and I asked him about the unnamed Princess of Dorne, he said he didn't think there was any mention of her. Maybe there was, but that there were many interesting Martell women in the book. And I have to say, many? Really? Many?
Not really.
There's 2 new Martell women. Like, I counted. There's 2 new Martells that we had never heard of. Daria, who's Maria's granddaughter, and Eleandra Martell, who is Prince Corin's daughter. And there's like 2 or 3 new males. So that's not many, I wouldn't say, by any
It wasn't biased towards one or
word.
the other. It just wasn't very thorough.
Yeah, and so I personally felt that Dorne was the weakest of the sections. It is my favorite region, though, so I think I would have just been dissatisfied regardless.
You're going to want more no matter what.
But I don't think my dissatisfaction is unwarranted.
You were told some things, and that's not what
I was
happened,
expecting there to be a lot of Martell women. I was hoping we would at least get the name of the unnamed Princess of Dorne. That's Doran, Oberyn, and Elia's mother, because I don't want to keep calling her the unnamed Princess of Dorne.
Yeah, that's kind of awkward.
It's confusing, and it's awkward and long, and I just want her to have a name. She's important. She taught Doran and her children a lot of important things.
Yeah.
But silver lining of that, there was a lot about Nymeria. That's great.
There was more on the Nymerian and the fleeing from the destruction of the Rhoynar and their wanderings before. Quite a bit on that. There was more than we expected there, so that was very cool.
Yeah, there was that. Certainly, things were cut from the book, so maybe more things were just cut from the Dorne section, and maybe they just had more cut than the other sections, and George wasn't lying to me when he said there were many Martell women listed. They are the last region listed. Maybe they just got the brunt of some of that.
He may have written a lot of stuff.
Yeah, he may have written a lot. It just wasn't in there.
Yeah.
So
we're not going to assume he was.
So hopefully
lying,
there are a lot of that, but a lot of the Dorne section is about the conquest of Dorne, and so it's really tied into the Targaryens. Just a lot of the Dorne history is tied into the Targaryens, so it's not really much about Dorne and the Martells, which I think is why it felt so short to me, because I did a comparison of the various Westerosi regions. I wanted to see which are the longest. Like, are my impressions right or wrong? I didn't do a word count of the ebook or anything like that, because that wasn't worth the time. I just did a rough estimation on the hard copy, discounting full pages, and when there's like a half page, I just combine pages. So this is very rough. I'm going to go from least to most on how long the actual regions of Westeros were. The North was only around 8 pages, unless you count Beyond the Wall, which I didn't. So that's the shortest of all of them, was on the North. Mm-hmm. The Vale was only around 8.5. The Riverlands and the Stormlands were both around 9, so they're middling. The Westerlands was around 10, pretty good. Dorne was around 11, so it wasn't nearly the shortest, though I still think a lot of it was about the Targaryens, so maybe I would count a little less about Dorne itself. The Reach had 12, and the Iron Islands had 16. 16 pages.
Maybe that's making up for them being cut from season 5.
Yeah.
We already knew they were going to be cut from season 5.
But that's impressive. A lot of Iron Island stuff.
Yeah. So, and of course, the book has a ton of Targaryen stuff on it. Yeah. We couldn't count the pages because there's so many, and they're in different sections. But that's to be fair. That this is certainly not a complaint. I love Targaryen stuff.
Yeah.
The book isn't focused on them, but there is more on them than any of the other regions, and that's fair in a lot of sense, because they ruled Westeros for almost 300 years, and that is the bulk of the accurate history we have, is the most recent history. That just makes sense. True. It's like we know more about the last 20 years of that's happened in America than we do in the first 20 years, even though we have pretty good records of that stuff. So it's the same kind of thing. More recent history is just more accessible.
To be fair, we are having Fire and Blood come out eventually. There'll be even more Targaryen stuff.
Yep.
But
a lot of that's already written. That's part of why.
But so as we said a few times, there were things cut, and so when we attended the Westerlands reading at Con Carolinas, we took vigorous notes, which you can find on our website. And one of my friends, Lauren, Joanna Lannister on Tumblr, she obviously loves the Lannister stuff, and immediately upon getting the book, she was like, "This is just different. There's just things missing from this book." And she compared it to our notes, and it's just cut down. You can see how it was cut down, which is interesting to see how they cut things down, what was cut down, things like lines.
I've tweeted the link that shows the comparisons as well as posted it on our forums. So go.
Yeah, we're not going to get into very in depth. When we talk about the Westerlands more, we'll talk about it more. But yeah, there's just some stuff like they talk about just a few examples. They talk about. In our notes, we have that Jason Lannister impregnated a serving girl, and then he impregnated a girl from House Stackspear, and it was died in childbirth. None of that is in there, but in the family tree, you see that Jason Lannister had Lynora Hill. So
what we believe is what happened is George read from what he wrote for the history of the Westerlands, not what is in this final copy. So if you're looking, once you finish the book, if you haven't already, check out our notes and these comparisons, because it's a little additional information. George wrote it. So it's probably canon.
I mean, certainly we got some things wrong.
A couple of things were errors.
But you can see, you can just see there's just whole paragraphs that we have in our notes that just weren't in there, and a lot of it makes sense that they would cut that down. Yeah. Some of it makes you wonder why they cut it, but usually it's probably just for space. Certainly, I don't think most of it was cut for anything spoilery or anything like that. I think it was just space. But interesting to speculate on.
Following this thread, though, if stuff was cut from the Westerland section, then probably stuff was cut from pretty much everywhere. We know stuff was cut from the Targaryen section.
Yeah, and so that's why Dorne, probably stuff cut. Probably his personal section has a lot of nice stuff, and so any readings that George has from this stuff, we need to be taking really good notes on. Even though the book is out, everyone needs to take notes.
Be wary. If George reads from one of these sections at a con... Now, I feel like he's probably going to go back to reading Winds of Winter chapters at cons when he does this. But if he does happen to read from
Fire and Blood
or something like that.
Or just history notes. He doesn't have just history notes that he has.
Don't assume he's just going to read exactly what's in the World of Ice and Fire. Yeah. He's got more out there. And we're hoping that material gets published someday. I can't imagine it won't.
My big question that I had was that my impression of Fire and Blood is that it's mostly focused on the Targaryens. I mean, the title is Fire and Blood, that it's a chronicle of Targaryen kings.
Yes.
So some of this information that is cut, I just don't see how it will fit into Fire and Blood unless it's not what I'm imagining. And I like the idea that he could just do a different book for each region, and he could get a lot of money out of every one of us. I would easily purchase every one. They could be a short book with just that stuff.
They could each be named after their house
Unbowed,
words.
Unbrent, Unbroken. I would buy that in a second. Hear Me Roar. That would just have the unabridged version of Lannister stuff. That would be great.
We'd buy them all. Podcast about them all.
Yeah, I would not
sleep with them under our pillows.
But so hopefully, my impression of Fire and Blood is wrong, because when it was called the Gramillion, when they were just referring to it as that, I had the impression of it just being about everything, but that would be an awful lot, and now they're going by Fire and Blood.
We might also just might be wrong about how much extra material there is for these other ones. Like, there was certainly a lot cut from the Targaryen stuff, and that's why there's Fire and Blood is going to happen. But... And we've seen how much is cut from the Westerland stuff. It wasn't that much. It was a good chunk.
But we didn't. But to be fair, we didn't see we didn't read all the Westerland stuff for us. But a lot of it.
That's true. That is very true.
But so maybe more was cut from the later half. But
that might be a sign that there's just way more unreleased Targaryen material than anything else. But still, we want it all. We want it all.
If there's like one paragraph in each region that was cut total, I want those paragraphs.
Give it up.
So
bring it here.
That is.
Gimme.
Yeah.
When it comes to Westeros history, we're greedy. Greedy like
But there was some other, back into like more region-specific things. There's those resource maps.
Since we just covered the different regions, we also took note of some very high-level topics. There's maps for each region that are kind of cool, stylized maps that actually have like little resource tidbits, there's lumber here, and there's gold and silver here.
Yeah, some have more than others.
Pretty basic, but some have more than others for sure. But it gives you an idea of a little more information on what the realms are like as far as the geography and what they're like. We know what their people are like pretty well, but the actual regions themselves, it's a little less. We're not quite as knowledgeable about that.
Yeah, we got some nice stuff on Skagos and the Mountain Clans. Pretty much what we are. Nothing we really would want to change in our episode that I could think of.
No, not really.
Stuff we would add, but it was pretty much in line with what we thought.
Exactly, especially because the Maesters are poo-poo all the magic stuff. The Maesters didn't like the idea of. This Maester, anyway, didn't like the idea of unicorns and Skagos, even though there's all these accounts of them, and we've seen the horned goat through Shaggy Dog's eyes.
Yeah.
But he does make the point that, we don't have a skeleton.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty good, his case is, that's a good reason to object to that. but we as readers know better.
Yeah. Yeah.
And really cool. Yeah, there's stuff about the Mountain Clans, the Cranach Men, the Night's Watch, the Wildlings. But yeah, like a lot of it is overview stuff that we kind of know already. But and it's kind of interesting to see that they just don't. The Maester's knowledge is kind of incomplete when you get that far north.
Yeah.
Maybe Maester Aemon is sending them stuff, and they're just not
There's
taking,
a cool story
taking
about
it into account.
the Maesters working with the Children of the Forest, with having a trading post or whatever that was.
Maesters have been around a long time.
Yeah, it was interesting, that.
We also have a good bit on Harren the Black in Harrenhal itself, Harren versus the Riverlands, Officer of Harren's descendants. Yeah, that's a really cool story. You guys will like that.
Yeah.
And then all the kings of the Riverlands, that's part of that
all
because he
extinct
basically
houses.
destroyed them. Yeah, there's a lot of extinct houses in the Riverlands. It makes sense. We've talked plenty of times in our Riverlands series and elsewhere about how war-torn the Riverlands is. Well, that's how it's always been. So you would think that a place with the most war would have the most number of houses going extinct. And it's just a higher likelihood when you have all that killing going on.
Yeah.
Really cool story about the clansmen of the Vale. They're, of course, descendants of the first men from the Vale who held out from all the Andal invasions. Of course, the Vale is where the Andals first came and first kind of established themselves. Well, really cool tidbit there. You guys remember Nettles from The Princess and the Queen? Well, the Painted Dogs, I believe they were, an offshoot of the clan. The Painted Dogs are where the Burned Men came from. And the Burned Men date back to having met Nettles and Sheepstealer in the Vale. When Nettles disappeared, she went to the Vale and established herself in the mountains, I guess. And they referred to her as a fire witch, and she had a dragon and all this. So I guess that they gave her gifts and tribute and stuff. And so I guess she kind of had a little mini...
Set herself up as a little goddess.
Yeah, she had a little... Why be a king when you can be a goddess? Or a queen when you can be a goddess? So that is a really cool little tidbit.
Yeah.
If that missed you, then that I'm sure you'll find that cool. There's a lot about the construction of the Eyrie. That's a long tale. That's interesting, and there's a lot of cool little detail there that we maybe didn't expect.
Yeah, like we said, there's a lot of Ironborn stuff. 16 pages of it. It's really 20 pages, but if you count the art.
Yeah, there's some cool art there. There's a lot of stuff about
lots
Kingsmoods.
about the Great King.
The religious, the Great King. That's right. There's like religious struggles in there, and there's been several attempts to try and civilize the Ironborn and to turn them away from the old way, and it always just keeps coming back.
Yeah, there was that stuff about Harmond the Handsome, which is cool. We'll talk a little bit about.
And Quelon Greyjoy's father, Balon, was very progressive. He tried to end thraldom, and he was very peaceful, but he was also badass, which is part of why he was able to keep the Ironborn in line, because he was an effective leader. And there's also the Red Kraken, who was mentioned very briefly in The Princess and the Queen. Well, if you were disappointed that the Red Kraken didn't appear more in The Princess and the Queen, there is way more than I would have expected in this book about him. It's like maybe 2 full pages of the 16 are just about him. So you'll enjoy reading about him. He's a very cool character.
Yeah, we have that stuff about Tytos Lannister's reign.
Quite a bit about Tytos and his era.
Which
Tywin is a big part of this book.
Yeah, like we said, you'll want to look at the comparisons post to see. There's some more stuff about Tytos' reign and about Ellen reign. I didn't mean to say that. But like we said, also Garth Greenhand. The stuff about Garth Greenhand and his children, that was particularly cool.
But also just the legends around him are really neat. And he had apparently the original throne at Highgarden was called the Oaken Seat, and it was a living throne. Unfortunately, it was destroyed, so it's no longer a living throne. But that sounds really neat. I like that idea that they had a throne carved out of a tree that was still alive. And I don't know, that just seems cool to me. And then there's plenty of stuff about Old Town. Old Town is so old, and there's a lot of stories about Old Town and the High Tower. That's really cool. The Citadel, of course, there's some ancient history about the Citadel, and there's a place called Battle Isle, which is where Hightower is, and how nobody knows why it's called Battle Isle. It's always just been called that. Well, what battle was fought there? Maybe the War for the Dawn, some sort of last battle kind of deal. Your guess is as good as ours. We don't really know. In the Stormlands, there's some talk about the Rainwood that we weren't aware of. The Children of the Forest were a really major force there. That was one of their last kind of hideouts.
Hidey holes.
I was about to say that. And the Rainwood, so the Rainwood is really interesting. Rhaenys Targaryen kind of burned it at one point, a lot of it. Storm's End. There's some new theories about Storm's End and the fact that it was rebuilt 7 times. There's some theories about how maybe some of these buildings were a lot more recent than people say, based on architecture, other details like that.
Yeah, there was some stuff about the settlement of Dragonstone. There's also an interesting quote too in the book where it was about Septon Barth's claims that the Valyrians came to Westeros because their priests prophesied the doom of man would come out of the land beyond the narrow sea.
And this maester dismisses that basically out of hand. But the doom of man coming out of Westeros, huh? Sounds like the others, right? Doesn't that just sound like so? This is one of the reasons we trust Septon Barth on most, because like all these times he's said, "Oh, we don't trust what he's saying," and then we look, if you do the digging, you find out, oh, he was right about that too. And when you keep looking at the list and you see that he was right about pretty much everything, well, it's time to listen to the guy if you weren't already. So pay attention when you see the name Septon Barth. You should your theory, all your conspiracy theories and ideas should be at full swing when you see that guy's name mentioned, because this is good data there. Of course, there's plenty about the conquest. The conquest, the Aegon's conquest of Westeros is very well detailed, as well as the time after his death.
Both in the Targaryen
the
sections
Sons of
and
the
in
Dragon
other
era
sections.
that we have been putting a lot of work into preparing episodes on that, all the way up till the Peace of the Old King. And you really find some interesting things about how recent some of the things are. Like Jaehaerys is the guy who built the King's Road. We knew that. But he built a lot of the other roads too, not just the King's Road. So he had a lot to do with that. And he also, he codified the laws. So there's a lot of big things he did. Lots of time in general spent to pretty much each Targaryen king. Pretty much each one has at least one page.
At least one page, yeah.
Several have more than that, given how important their eras were, or a lot of them pop up in multiple places. And again, just like the art in the index, just like the art index, rather, there art appendix, I guess I should call it. There is a regular appendix of characters. You can look up in the back and see Rhaegar Targaryen. It tells you every page Rhaegar Targaryen appears on. It's quite a few, actually.
Look up Valyria and the Valyrians,
That's right. So
of course, nothing will beat just a search in the book, but with
that's true.
But
So there's, of course, there's also a lot about the Blackfire Rebellions, which is something that we are going to be doing episodes on. When I asked you guys to tell us which topics you're most interested in, that was one of the more popular responses we got. Was the Blackfire Rebellions.
Maybe Jeff wants to do stuff on the Blackfire Rebellion sometime.
There is
some
I'm
battles
sure he would.
that.
One slightly frustrating thing was that Maester makes mention of the third Blackfire Rebellion and says, mentions all these things. A short paragraph about all these things that we already know a lot about. I'm like, no, we don't know anything about these things. So the third Blackfire Rebellion, there isn't very much about. But here's a tip. When you read the book and you see something that says, we already know about this, so we're not going to talk about it. When the Maester says that, it's a good chance that is going to be a future story. I am 100% positive that this third Blackfire Rebellion isn't being talked about because it will be featured heavily in a Dunk and Egg story.
Yeah.
The third Blackfire Rebellion happened in 219 AC, and the Mystery Knight happened in 212. We're not that far away from it. And one of those little tidbits that the Maester mentioned when just glossing over the third Blackfire Rebellion was the valor of Maekar's youngest son. The Maekar's youngest son is Egg. So we know he played a major role in this. So also, we're going to know that Aerion Brightflame and Duncan the Tall, of course, are going to play a part, and Bloodraven. So, that's going to be a good one. That's going to be a really good one. Some of the most important characters from fairly recent history will all appear in there.
Yeah, we also learned a little bit about their marriages. It was kind of interesting. They married, I forget who married who. I know Maekar married Deanna Dane, a Dane. And the other two, I can't remember which one married which, but Aerion, I think, married Alice Arryn, and then Daron married Jenna Dondarrion, or backwards. I'm not sure which. I guess I could look. But it's interesting. A Dondarrion and a Dane and an Arryn. But all
in the Targaryen tree there.
Yeah.
And of course, the Aarons had already married into the Targaryens.
Yeah, that one is the least surprising. It was most surprising for a Dondarrion and Dane to have married in, and that Maekar married the Danes. So. The Targaryens are descended from the Danes.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, and that seems to make sense because of the way they look. Like if you're trying to restore the Valyrian look to the Targaryens, it was starting to get a little Dornish.
You might.
The only house in Westeros, you could certainly go to Lys or somewhere across the Narrow Sea and find that Valyrian look to try and
Yeah,
create babies that look like that.
Yeah, so maybe this Diana had the more Valyrian looking look with the silver hair, purple eyes, or maybe she just had purple eyes. Maybe she didn't look like either.
Because the Danes really aren't that big of a house. I mean, they're really popular. They're one of the most famous houses in the fandom, and we did get some good information on them. As usual, we want more,
because
but we got some
good
good info.
In the morning, so there's going to be stuff. Those are people that are going to, stand out, in history.
But they have pretty much no political sway. They're not mentioned pretty much ever in modern times as doing anything important as far as, affecting policy decisions or making, we don't really hear about them doing a whole lot. So
now Miriam took as a consort
her third husband, I guess, right?
The dashing Sir Davos Dane.
Davos Dane.
Yeah, it was cool. Yeah. Another Davos.
Davos is apparently a bigger name than we would have thought. There's a couple of big Davoses, so that's cool.
Interesting.
But also, getting back to this Blackfire Rebellion stuff, there's a lot on Bloodraven. There's a few surprises there. A lot on Bittersteel. Some surprises there. Very cool stuff, and a lot about their families. We get a really good, not entirely complete, but mostly complete reckoning of Daemon's sons, and there's enough information there to deduce some more about which other Blackfires came from where, like Maelys, and there's even this really crazy incident with Aenys Blackfire that you guys should just read for yourself if you've already read it. You know what I'm talking about. I don't want to spoil that. It's really cool. But Bloodraven, that guy, what a piece of work. Mm-hmm. We're gonna definitely do. We've been talking about doing a Bloodraven episode for a while, and there's just no way around that.
Yeah, Bloodraven was painted really favorably in this. I thought.
Yeah, he is. That's true.
Yeah, he was. He was specifically. I was trying to get to my notes.
Well, he's mentioned, if you remember.
Oh yeah, they said that he had sacrificed his own personal honor for the good of the realm.
That's right. In other words, he was. He was willing to be the bad guy to make good things happen. That's this Maester's judgment, which is interesting because nowadays, when people talk about Bloodraven, or like in his own time, he was really maligned.
Yeah.
Even though he was
clearly
a lot of people thought he was effective.
But this Maester seems to think that he's just. Yeah, I seem to discuss him not negatively.
Which is really interesting. Yeah. We also get very precise dates for him going to the Night's Watch and getting lost and becoming Lord Commander. So that is very cool. We also get speaking of Bloodraven and Bittersteel, the Great Bastards, we get all the mistresses of Aegon IV in detail
and pictures of them. It's just some of Magali's best work, I thought. I liked the mistresses pieces,
and there are a few surprises in there too. And there's some deductions that can be made from relationships that Aegon IV had with women who had their own children. So it casts doubt on the parentage. There could be Targaryen blood in a couple of other houses, although for the there's also, as we said, there's a lot on Tywin, but in particular, it's Tywin and Aerys together because, of course, those two their stories are intertwined for most of their lives, and that relationship is given a lot of screen time, so to speak. So that's really cool. There's also a lot of detail on the Defiance of Duskendale. We get some detail on Sir Barristan in there, and that's all really good stuff. And there's quite a bit about Rhaegar as well. We're going to talk about Rhaegar in a couple places here, but there's a lot of stuff about Rhaegar and his relationship with Aerys himself, his own father. And there's quite a few surprises there as well. Not just surprises, but just flat out things we just didn't know that really add to the picture. So that in itself is a great reason to pick up this book. There's also a good amount on Robert's Rebellion. Maybe not quite as much as we would have wanted. I kind of wanted more detail on the Rebellion. I was hoping for more than that, but what we do get is quite solid, so I'm at least happy with that. But there's a good bit that's just kind of rehashing.
When he was writing it, he was like, Robert doesn't need me to tell him about the rebellion.
That's a good point. The book is originally presented to Robert. It's supposed to be presented to Robert Baratheon, but then it's erased, and instead it's written Joffrey, and then that's erased, and it says Tommen. What would be really cool is if by the end of the series, this Maester Yandel, who wrote the book, what if he were to appear in the books and present this book to, say, King Aegon VI or Daenerys.
Anyone.
So he scratched out that name and wrote this person in. So that we could see that happening. That'd be really cool.
Or he'll come up. Maybe he finished it in time to give it to Tommen.
I hope not. Tommen doesn't deserve that. Tommen at least wouldn't hack it in half like Joffrey.
Yeah, definitely.
He would just be like, I don't care. So there's also As Ashea mentioned earlier, there's a lot on the unexplained and the wonders of the world and the Far East and all these other things. There's some questions on magical events in the past.
Yeah, all of this stuff you got to take with even more of a grain of salt. Like, how would the Maester know all this stuff about it?
Right. Well, in some cases, they're referring to other Maesters.
Yeah.
And in some cases, he's just purely
just,
speculating.
when it's in these far off regions, you have to take all of it with you can't believe all of it very much at all.
Definitely, because a quote we get from Ashai asks questions about Castle Rock that make no sense.
Yeah.
Like, do they really live in a castle of gold? So if people in Ashai think that Castle Rock is made of gold, then the stories people hear about Ashai and Castle Rock are going to probably be about as silly. So we have to kind of distill them a bit. But still, the fully inflated mythical versions are really cool, too. So we don't want to just ignore those details, because the truth can be found within those kernels.
Yeah, for instance, we have the breaking of the world, the stepstones, which are said by, is our understanding, to be the children of the forest having done that, having split Westeros off, whereas the Maesters postulate that it was just,
seismic activity. That's what we call it in modern times.
Yeah.
It's just, the plate shifted and it was a natural event. The part of the stepstones went underwater, and that's what happened. And you can, for a superstitious magic having culture, putting that on the children who have all this power over nature, it kind of makes sense in a way. But at the same time, there's a regular explanation that might make more sense.
And I don't know which one I think, The Maester, I am inclined to not listen to the Maesters a lot because I know they have this bias, but I'm also inclined to just, that's a real thing. That makes sense to me. The Children of the Forest didn't do that many, crazy magical things. Like, maybe they're just attributing it to them.
Yeah.
Like, that would be, one of the most powerful things they did, along with the neck. And so I think I maybe lean towards it not having just been, them, breaking it off.
Yeah.
But maybe this is the case of the Maester just influencing me with their anti-magic sentiment. But
so now there's one of our favorite mysteries is this pervasive talk throughout many different regions and places and times even about this oily, greasy, black stone. It's described in both ways in different places, and we're thinking it's probably the same.
Yeah, it's found in a multitude of places. It's found from the Sea Stone Chair to Ashai to possibly the High Tower's fortress that it resides upon to Yiti to the Basilisk Isles to the city of Yin in Sithorios.
Yeah, and in some cases, the stone is described a little differently, and so some of these examples may not fit in this little sphere.
Yeah.
But this oily black stone, nobody knows where it came from. It doesn't match anything any of the Maesters can find anywhere else. And just like the initial base of the High Tower, before it was a tower, it was just a fort. Nobody knows who built that, and nobody knows who built the Sea Stone Chair. How crazy is that? The Sea Stone Chair, just this ornate carved throne that has just kind of always been there. And so that has led to a lot of interesting theories about the origin of the Ironborn, and as well as people maybe thinking that there is some people across the Sunset Sea there, far to the west of Westeros, past the Iron Isle, past the Iron Islands and all that, and maybe that this came from there. Maybe it came from some long forgotten civilization. Aliens. It could be. We always got to throw aliens out there, but there's also an important tie-in from another literature here, and that is H.P. Lovecraft's writings are really, they're just all over the place. George is clearly heavily influenced by H.P. Lovecraft. There are a ton of H.P. Lovecraft references. This oily black stone, this is an H.P. Lovecraft reference. As are some of these things that the Ironborn believe about their origins. They believe that they may have bred with some sort of fish people, hybrid fish people. The dead ones,
what's it called?
The deep ones.
Deep ones.
And the deep ones, the term deep ones is straight from Lovecraft. And they did the same thing. They bred with humans, and eventually these people would want to return to the sea, which is kind of what the Ironborn do in a sense. When they die, they want to return to the sea. That's what's important to them. So it's not, he's obviously not copying this, but it's heavily influenced by it, and but with his own wonderful spin, putting it into his fantasy world. So it's really cool. If you're an H.P. Lovecraft fan, you're going to catch a lot of these references yourself. If you're not, well, maybe I'm tempting you to buy some of these things and check them out. Lovecraft is a great writer. He wasn't a great guy, but he was a great writer.
So the High Tower's fortress, It's described as just black stone, and there are other things described as just black stone that we discounted when making this list, and we would have been inclined to do that for the High Tower, the fortress, not the High Tower itself, obviously. But Maester Theron notes a similarity between the Sea Stone chair and the High Tower's fortress, and the Sea Stone chair is described as oily black stone, and if he saw it himself, maybe it is just oily and it was never described as such. So that one's up. We don't know if that is the oily, greasy black stone or just black stone, because the Valyrian citadels, the Valyrians had this fused black stone that they used, which I think is pretty clearly different from the oily black stone. It's never described as oily. Yeah. So possibly they theorize that it was just that, and the 5 forts is also described as having black stone.
The 5 forts are about as far east as the map goes. Yeah. It's at the edge of Yiti, and it was apparently originally they were designed. Who knows why? The history of Yiti goes back so far. Yeah. But one legend says they were raised by the Pearl Emperor. The Yiti emperors are all named after gemstones, and this was supposed to keep the Lion of Night at bay. The Lion of Night demons. Is kind of their Satan of sorts. And the forts are ridiculously huge, and they're, like Ashaya said much earlier, they're 1,000 feet high or so, which is bigger than the wall. And there are 5 of these things, and each can garrison like 10,000 men.
Yeah, so. I can't help it when I see that. Well, one, I think about, take it with a grain of salt a little bit, but I also think about the fact that when George, I forget when he said it exactly, but there's a quote that he said that I stuck with me when he saw like the wall for Game of Thrones or something like that. He was like, "I made it too tall. I made it too tall." And so if that's too tall, and that's like magic. Then, and this is...
What do we make of this?
What do we make of this? I tend to think that it's a bit of an exaggeration, but also very tall. And these walls made of black stone.
Fused black stone with no cuts. It's not like there's no mortar, there's no... Yeah, just big slabs.
So it's compared to the Valyrian citadels, and it's not described as oily, so I don't think it's that oily black stone, but it would be interesting if it was, and if it was used to keep out, not for the others, some kind of other, thing. Is it just wrong? It's so far off, it's hard to know, but it sure sounds like it, to keep the Lion of Night and his demons from the realms of men. A wall 1,000 feet high.
Yeah, it sounds vaguely familiar.
Sounds like the wall a lot.
This area that the forts stand on the edge of is called the Grey Waste.
Yeah, it's it kind of just makes me think of another one of the hinges of the world, and so maybe they attacked from that region a long time ago, and then they prophesied that the doom of man would come from beyond the Narrow Sea next time, and so now it's going to come from Westeros again. Maybe I can't help but think that there has to have been an attack from the far regions of Essos beyond by the bones.
It really could have happened, something like that. Yeah, and of course the stories wouldn't necessarily have reached Westeros, and certainly not intact.
Yeah,
especially if they happened that long ago.
Yeah, just all the tales of Azor Ahai equivalents in Essos. Similarly, I don't think it would have reached all the way there, and they would have had these huge, all these stories of someone up at the wall. Really interesting. But some of those greasy black stones, one is on the Isle of Toads. It's a greasy black stone crudely carved into the semblance of a gigantic toad.
40 feet high.
Yeah, 40 feet high. But some of these people on this isle are believed to have descended from those who carved it, for they have a fish-like aspect to their faces, and many have webbed feet.
Again, this is Lovecraft.
Yeah,
this is very Lovecraft.
So it's very interesting there.
And there's also this great story of this city called Yeen that we mentioned briefly.
Yeah.
And how Yeen, even Nymeria and her people went there, and people have tried to resettle it, and it always ends in nightmare.
Yeah, and the jungle never
just die.
hardly touches it.
The jungle won't go near it. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, Nymeria says a city so evil that even the jungle will not enter.
And this reminds us a bit of Ashai, really, because Ashai also apparently nothing grows there either.
Yeah, and Ashai is also made of this black stone. It's built entirely of black stone, and it has a greasy, unpleasant feel to it. The stone of Ashai does.
Yeah, it kind of absorbs the light, so people People say it's dark there.
That's
no matter
pretty
what.
clear. That's obviously an example of the greasy stone as well.
And the Ashai, you have no idea where their city came from. They kind of think of and their idea of when their city came from is very similar to the Sea Stone Chair and the High Tower. In other words, they don't know. They have no idea. It's their legends kind of they are so helpless in this regard that they basically just say it's always been there.
Yeah.
And Ashai is the size of King's Landing, Bravos, and Volantis combined.
But it only has
insane.
it only has about the size, population of like a market town.
Yeah, and there's no children there.
No children. Yeah.
How crazy!
We'll
and
talk
creepy.
a little bit about what that could mean, but
and this just all ties. I think this all ties together with the whole things not growing there. Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe if plants and animals don't grow, then why would babies?
yeah.
But where are they getting people from?
But yeah, in UT, we also had another mention of that black stone there. This is one where we don't know if it's not described as the greasy black stone or oily, but it is. It's about the Bloodstone Emperor who cast down the true gods to worship a black stone that had fallen from the sky, which just it sounds like them worshiping this toad, the black toad thing. I feel like it maybe is like that. I included it for that reason, but it isn't described as greasy. So definitely keep your eye out for all those black stones.
Yeah, there's no way we probably caught all the black stone references.
Yeah, I mean, there's other black stones that aren't described
as
oily or greasy. Like Harrenhal has black stone, but that's not oily or greasy. But it's certainly interesting when doing a search for black stone what comes up. Yeah. The Valyrians used black stone as well often. That fused black stone.
So speaking of Valyria, there's a lot of discussion of ancient Valyria. A lot of it's really hazy because, well, the Doom destroyed Valyria, and of course most of the records that were there would have been destroyed with it. So there is a good bit though on them, and there's quite a bit on Valyria. There's a good bit on the Giscari Empire as well, and a lot on the two of them together as they fought each other. And over the centuries, they had all these different wars. There's a lot of new detail there. And, of course, the children, quote-unquote, of Valyria, not the children of the forest, but the children of Valyria, such as the 9 free cities, but there's others. There are a lot of Valyrian settlements that have been abandoned, that some of them are out there that are described in detail. Yeah. There's a place called Gorgassos that used to be called Gozai that was founded by the Giscari but conquered by Valyria. And in Valyria, there's a great quote here. In the flesh pits, blood sorcery of the darkest sort was practiced, as beasts were mated to slave women to bring forth twisted half-human children. So any of these crazy, weird races that you see out there, like the brindled men of Sithorios, especially because Gorgassos is in Sithorios.
Yeah.
These could be the result of these genetic breeding experiments.
Yeah.
And it also really is a tantalizing clue towards how the dragons and the ancient Valyrians did their thing. Because the blood of the dragon, if that's like at all, even slightly literal, then there's some sort of crossbreeding with humans and dragons. And there's evidence for that with the way some of these Targaryen babies were born.
Yeah, it's true.
With their tails and scales and wings sometimes. And obviously Daenerys' child had all those things, basically. Yeah. So it might, on the surface, the idea that the Valyrians actually crossbred themselves with dragons sounds kind of silly, but there's actually a decent bit of circumstantial evidence for it.
Yeah.
So we can't throw it out. It's definitely an idea that has merit. And connecting again with Ashai here, Ashai in the Shadow, there's some evidence that the first dragons came from the Shadow area, or maybe that the dragons were the product of some of these similar but more ancient crossbreeding experiments. Wyverns are a thing in Sithorios, and wyverns are kind of like smaller dragons in a lot of ways. They don't breathe fire either. And there's also these fireworms that the Valyrians discovered while doing all their extensive mining beneath those volcanoes called the 14 Fires. And, well, I mean, a fireworm and a wyvern combined would be a dragon, basically. Yeah. So you never know if maybe they toyed with these things. They were certainly steeped in sorcery, from all we're told.
Modified.
GMO wyverns.
But
I will never eat GMO dragon meat. No, I'll eat all the GMO dragon meat you serve me.
But yeah, about that the children thing is really, I just get stuck on that, on the no children in Ashai thing, and it's so far off. Like we said, the people in Ashai think that Casterly Rock is made of gold. It's a palace made of gold. So really, how serious can we take some of these claims? It could just be wrong. It could just be flat out incorrect. There are children there. It's just wrong. It's possible they just keep their children in an area of the city that the reporter didn't see. or that they keep them out of sight, they keep them outside the city. It could be something like that. They do have children. It could be that they just are infertile, that they're sterile, like Aziz said, that they just like food can't grow there, people can't grow people. But,
it makes sense, because they also said that no animals could survive.
Yeah,
there.
no animals could survive, so...
And Septon Barth, there's a magical explanation for that, so I believe Septon Barth.
So... If it's right though, and there are no children, and it means that they don't have children, because there have to be some children. We know that. How does the population
It's a transplant
continue?
of entire. It's the city of transplants or something.
Yeah, so we know that Melisandre was sold to the Red Temple as a child, so possibly they just buy their children, which would mean that there are children there. But that would be how they would continue it, just by buying children and shipping them in.
That explanation doesn't satisfy me though, because it's just like, what are they all? They're all slaves.
They were all slaves, and
there's definitely just something we haven't been told.
Yeah, and it seems like the citizens of Ashai have really long lives. They have to sustain this population.
Yeah,
and they're only a small market town. Clearly, it's not a lot of people want to live there.
Yeah,
they have to either have children or bring them in. So Melisandre could have been born there, which would indicate
and she is,
children.
Of course, as we've mentioned, she is really, really old. So the fact that her age might be related to this Ashai not having children, maybe they have really long lives.
Yeah,
who knows?
Yeah.
Instead of, because if you imagine it as just a zone of where nothing can grow, nothing is fertile, it may also be that things are static time-wise, and aging is slowed down or something. I'm just making things up, but that's all we have to go on.
Yeah, it was interesting when we were talking about this. I had always had the impression that Melisandre was sent to Ashai, that she was sold there. Whereas when I was talking about it with Aziz, he had more thought that she was born there.
Well, I don't think that she's necessarily born there.
You just had more of that impression than I did. I had more of the impression of neither of us were sold on either one of the either one.
Yeah.
But you were like, oh well, if Melisandre was born there, and I had just never even really thought that she could have been born there. I just never. It's just interesting what our impressions are. What were your impressions?
Did you think
she was born there? But. So are they sterile? Can they only have shadow babies?
That's what it does to you, living in Ashai. All your babies come out as shadows.
Yeah.
So that's a big mystery. We have been told that we're not... Originally, I think George originally intended Daenerys to go to Ashai when he first was running the series, but that is not the case anymore. She's definitely not going to Ashai. We're not going to see Ashai in the books. That's what George has said that. But there's an exception. We might see some of it in Melisandre's flashbacks.
Yeah.
It's already established that she's a POV character.
She's already been thinking about that kind of thing with her Melanie Lot 7. She clearly she hasn't just put it all behind her.
They definitely have slaves in Ashai, so that's that fits. So although we don't know that she was sold there or to there or from there, we don't.
Yeah, we don't.
We know that she was named Melanie and then Lot 7, or maybe that was her mother's name. Her child was sold with her. Anyway.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of other references. There's references to the giants. There's talk about the children of the forest. Of course, there's a long section on the first men, the Andals. He's very praising of the Andals because that's what everybody is for the most part. They're the dominant race in Westeros. But there's also the Rhoynar. And the Rhoynar, we said there's a long story about them, about Nymeria's wanderings. But before that, there's some things as well.
About their cities.
Their cities and their technology, and how they brought a lot of technology with them. They brought a lot of the craftsmen that came with Nymeria, with all the Rhoynish people, really made Dorne more of a melting pot than it already was, and really made it a standout region for being so different and having greater technology, better arts and crafts and things like that. And that played a huge role in Nymeria helping Mors Martell conquer Dorne. Yeah. And of course, we talked about the deep ones and then the old ones, and more Lovecraft references again. A couple things about House Dane that are a little odd. It's mentioned that the Valyrians are unusual in their look, and that they have this silver/gold hair in their purple eyes, which no one else really has. And why do the Danes have that? The Danes, for the most part, all the Danes we've seen are to some degree along those lines. They're not pure gold hair, but Edric Dane has hair so... it's like ash colored, he says. So it's like silvery ash colored. And Darkstar has silver and black hair, but they all have the purple eyes and so that's a bit of a mystery.
It's not, they're not Valyrian though.
It's pretty clear that they're not Valyrian, but
Yeah.
it's possible that they've been there a long time. I mean, their sigil, they've got Dawn has existed for a long time.
Yeah.
There's theories that Dawn itself is Lightbringer. I know
Yeah.
Elio and Linda like that
Yeah.
theory a lot.
And that's why the sword of the morning, the sword of the morning, is an office
Sword
created to
of
help
the
protect
morning.
it. Yeah.
Dawn,
Yeah, it's
stopping
a
a long night.
yeah.
Those things fit really well. And
Yeah.
even House Dane itself, if you think
Day.
House Dane, it's
Yeah.
the word day is
We
even
see
in
a
there.
sword of the evening in the book as well. I will
That's
say.
right, a sword of the evening.
And dark stars of the night.
That's right. Yes, he is of the night.
Huh.
So there's also a lot on. There's a lot on the Dothraki as well. There's a good bit on them and how they emerged. And there's some talk of this area north of where the Kingdom of Sarnor used to be, north of where the Dothraki Sea is, where there are these strange forest people that might be cousins to the Children of the Forest. In their description, they're called the Forest Walkers or something.
The Woodwalkers.
King Woodwalkers, that's right. The
Woodwalkers.
Kingdom of the Ifiqueveron or something like that. I have no idea how to say that word. But that is a very tantalizing glimpse into a possible connection to Westerosi things in Essos. If there's some sort of similar children, or it could just be something else. Who knows?
Interesting.
So we mentioned that we were going to talk about a few errors that were in the books.
There'll be a page for all of the errors eventually, Elio said on the forum, but they aren't there right now. Some of the errors are corrected in later printings and in the digital copy, but just a few examples of some of the errors that you could look for. Family trees have a lot of the errors, basic ones like Arya Targaryen and Rhaenys Targaryen listed as boys instead of girls. They just got to try. They've made it, instead of a triangle, it's a square. Or Jamie spelled Jamie like Jamie.
Yeah, there's a Miriel Lannister who's spelled Mael.
A little bit bigger of one is the Benedict Rogers.
Benedict Rogers you'll see in the Stark family tree, but that should be Benedict Royce.
Yeah. There is another Rogers, a Harold Rogers, and he should be a Rogers.
That is the correct Rogers.
A more notable one is that Lady Forlorn is listed as not being Valyrian. Is listed as being Valyrian steel, and this is far back in history.
Now this is right when the Andals came.
Yeah.
So there's pretty much no way a Valyrian steel blade existed in Westeros at that time, and Rand has even said that was an error.
Yeah,
however, the modern Lady Forlorn is a Valyrian steel blade, so the best guess is that it's the same as what happened with the Valyrian greatsword Ice, which the Starks had. The Starks had a blade called Ice, and then they got this Valyrian steel blade that they also named Ice, so it kind of took the place. So this is probably what happened too. They probably had some famous sword called Lady Forlorn that was passed down, and then they got a Valyrian steel blade and decided to give it that same name. It may even say him have the same hilt or something like that, or some other detail that's similar to the original version. But there's pretty much no way that this blade existed that far ago. There's just no examples of Valyrian steel blades being in Westeros really, but anywhere near that time period.
Yeah. There's also some possibly purposeful inconsistencies. We're guessing they're on purpose.
A lot of them are. The thing is that they're supposed to be inconsistencies because there's supposed to be maesters that are wrong and disagree with each other. But until the one confusing thing about that is you can't necessarily tell the difference between an actual error and an intentional one. These misspellings are clearly errors.
Luckily,
these family tree things are clearly errors.
Yeah, those are clearly. But luckily, we have Elio and Linda on the forum. You can just comment. You can say, hey, is this an inconsistency or an error? And they can clarify it, which is great. And they will have that page, which will even more clarify it. But one is that Lomas Longstrider is listed. They said Lomas Longstrider has never been to a shy, though. And then they also say Lomas Longstrider said about a shy when he talked to merchants there. And so clearly they did. It wasn't just he said of a shy. It made it clear he had been to a shy.
So I think that's one of those intentional.
Yeah, I believe that's
an intentional inconsistency.
So there's just a few other things like that you could maybe catch, but some of them might be on accident. Certainly worth, if you're on the forum or anything, there's a thread where people are talking about it, at least mentioning it.
Okay, well, we don't have a whole lot of time left. We're going to get into...
We only have 15 minutes.
We're going to get into the things that relate to the main storyline as much as possible. These could be considered... If you consider anything in this book a spoiler, these are the biggest spoilers. I would say. So
Yeah.
this may be something you don't want to hear yet, but if you do, let's move forward here.
Yeah. So the first biggest one, the one that jumped out at me immediately, it has huge implications for the Blackfire theory.
As in that Aegon the Sixth is a Blackfire.
Yeah,
that Illyrio and Varys may have ties to the
specifically
Blackfires.
that Sarah is possibly a descendant. She's one of the female Blackfires, a descendant from them, and that's where he gets some Targaryen heritage. Is a theory, and the daughters of Jaehaerys and Alysanne, there are 3 of them in a row, and it's very. I don't think it could just be a mistake. Clearly not. Like, it's clearly meant on purpose, and it could. I would easily accept that it's meant to not be a red herring, but meant to draw your attention, to think about the Blackfires and to think about Sarah and Illyrio, but not that Sarah is descended from a Blackfire. I think that's perfectly valid as well. But I don't think it's on accident that this is in there. I think we're meant to be thinking about Illyrio Sarah.
So the details are like this: we have one named Visera.
Yeah, it has Sarah.
It's spelled Visera. That's exactly how the Sarah part is exactly the woman that Illyrio talks about being in love with. That he, kept her stone hands after she died of grayscale.
Yeah.
And Visera's sister Majel died of grayscale.
Yeah.
And Sarah, Saera,
which sounds like
Sarah. She went overseas and became the owner of a famous brothel in Lys. Lys is where...
Well, it's not clear. It's not clear if it's in Old Volantis or Lys. She went to Lys for a while, and then she went to Old Volantis, and I'm not sure.
Okay, well, that's not important. In any case, she was the proprietor of a famous brothel, and that's where Illyrio met this Sarah at a brothel. This wouldn't be the same Sarah.
It wouldn't.
This is long before.
And it wouldn't be the same pillow house, obviously. But it's meant to draw a comparison between each of those 3 daughters has something in common with Sarah, basically,
and the story that Illyrio tells about her. So it's really that is a big kind of hit us right in the face.
Yeah,
there.
Huge.
That gives a lot more credit to the Blackfire theory.
Yeah, in general, and to the Sarah as the descendant of a female, as a female Blackfire.
Yep.
Theory in particular, but in general, I think it supports just the general Blackfire, theory. Period.
So we also have some new detail on Rhaegar and Lyanna, and one particularly important piece of detail that we never really got our hands on, and still there's a piece of this that's missing. But how did Rhaegar and Lyanna meet? Where did Rhaegar, quote unquote, abduct? Of course, we think runaway is probably more likely. Where did they meet to run off together? It wasn't after the tournament at Harrenhal. I mean, not right after. It was a good bit later. Well, it's possible. What we're told in the book, but in the World of Ice and Fire, is that Rhaegar would come face to face with Lyanna again within about 10 leagues of Harrenhal.
Yeah, it says not 10 leagues from Harrenhal.
Within 10 leagues of Harrenhal is not very far.
Yeah. So nobody suspects the butterfly and tumbler. She used the wall, a nice map. She used a map where the wall is, 300 miles. She used that to scale, to figure out what about 30 miles, 10 leagues would be from Harrenhal, and looked at the radius around it using this scale. And the Isle of Faces is just in the radius, and not much else is.
Yeah, it's just a bunch of empty space.
Yeah, they could have maybe just seen each other on the road, but the Isle of Faces is a spot right there. So maybe Lyanna was headed down with the marriage party to River Run, and she wanted to make a pilgrimage there. That would be a pretty good cover for getting away, possibly.
The marriage being Brandon's marriage.
Oh, yeah.
Brandon Stark's marriage to Catelyn.
So that's I mean, I don't know how else she would have gotten within 10 leagues of Harrenhal, because River Run is, no, you can't see back there, but it's not exactly close to Harrenhal. It's north of it. She would have had to go past River Run to go there. She would have had to have an excuse. I'm not sure how she would have gotten there, but it makes sense if she was going to get anywhere away from,
On the other hand, we can't take 10 leagues literally necessarily.
Yeah, it's true. We can't take that exactly literally, but it's probably not super. I feel like it has to be at least somewhat close to that.
Yeah, I doubt it's.
I doubt it's like they met up in the Vale.
Mm-hmm.
I doubt it's anything like that. It could have been just farther than 10 leagues, but it is worth noting that the Isle of Faces is exactly within that radius.
Yes.
So, it's interesting.
We're told that no one can go to the Isle of Faces, but that's just, this is, again, the Maesters talking about magical things.
They also could have just met not on the Isle of Faces.
Right, that's true.
just right next
on
to
the
it,
shore or
on the
something.
shore of
Yeah.
it, which would also be within 10. But it's like a landmark for them to meet at. It
Yeah.
makes more sense than let's meet, 10 leagues from Harrenhal on this dirt road.
So that's lots to digest. There's a lot of Rhaegar and Lyanna stuff that maybe you guys have some ideas we didn't come up with. There's also this mention of one of the details that wasn't in The Princess and the Queen was the Pact of Ice and Fire, which of course makes us think of things like Rhaegar and Lyanna and Jon Snow and things like that. Originally, it was that Cregan Stark, Lord of Winterfell during the Dance of the Dragons, was promised a Targaryen princess for his family, and this did not happen because the Dance of the Dragons, a lot of Targaryen princesses died. There weren't any left. So this never happened. But the concept and the fact that they was given that name is just really cool. So something more to think about there. The Pact of Ice and Fire.
It's the same acronym as Podcast of Ice and Fire.
That's true.
But
Also, there's an interesting note that the Tarths may have the Tarths.
yeah, I know.
Brienne and her family and her ancestors may have Targaryen blood.
Yeah.
So there's certainly basically what we know is that Dunk is probably an ancestor of Brienne. Dunk probably married before joining the Kingsguard. It's an idea. Some of this theory comes from our friend Kalgmoth, who goes by the name Lord Varys on the Westeros.org forums, and he's a great theorist and gatherer of information. He's got a great eye for these sort of things, especially family stuff and lineages. And so he's putting forth the idea that after Dunk and Egg return to Summerhall, Dunk meets and maybe falls in love with Daella, who is the sister that Egg was supposed to marry that he didn't marry. And he maybe marries her instead, Dunk does, and maybe they have children and Daella dies later, and that's why he joins the Kingsguard maybe, because he doesn't want to remarry and he doesn't, he's already had a family, all that. But this offspring would be the one who maybe goes and marries into House Tarth. Yeah. So it fits really nicely.
Yeah, certainly. If Dunk is gonna be an ancestor, it has to happen some way. He can't just have not had kids.
And remember that George said that Dunk has ancestors out there, so he definitely
descendants.
Descendants,
yeah.
rather.
He definitely has ancestors.
So, if given that he joined the Kingsguard and that he had predecessors, then or ancestors. Jeez, I'm just bad at this.
Descendants.
Descendants. And descendants. Damn it. So that means he had to have had kids before he joined the Kingsguard. Yeah. So that's part of the reason this theory fits so well. So so that's pretty cool. There might be some dragon blood in Brienne. I don't think that's going to matter, but it's cool.
Yeah, interesting. Really interesting.
We also have a lot more about Aerys and Joanna and Tywin. Their whole love triangle sort of things. Basically, triangle. This is a really major one. We're going to have to do an episode on this. We're just going to do this very briefly because it's one of the major. It's one of the major mysteries of A Song of Ice and Fire, as well as being something that's going to be talked about a lot coming up because it's mentioned in this book and this is new material. The possibility, I know there's two major theories that are out there. One is that Aerys is the father, well, I guess there's a third version as well, but the main two versions are that Aerys is the father of Jaime and Cersei, or that he's the father of Tyrion. A third, very minority group believes that both is possible. I really don't see that happening, but I guess that's got to be considered slightly possible. Anyway, the dates this Maester throws out as far as where people were and when kind of makes the Cersei Jaime thing almost impossible. Not entirely impossible, but close to impossible. Certainly a lot less likely than people who believe in the theory would have led themselves to believe initially. However, in the case of Tyrion, we have this very blatant clue about when Tyrion was born as compared to when Joanna made one of her very few visits to King's Landing. And we know that Aerys and Joanna had a relationship of some kind before she married Tywin. So Jaime and Cersei, probably not Tywin's, or probably not Aerys's, but Tyrion very possibly is. Certainly there's no proof one way or the other, but I think that to summarize, the theory about Jaime and Cersei is almost dead in the water, but the theory about Tyrion is stronger than it was.
Yeah, I couldn't help but think that they have a bit about, Tywin tried to resign, during that time
Yes.
that we were talking about. And I can't help but think that, if his wife was raped, he would have resigned. It would have been like, no, he tried to resign. I feel like he would have, like, that's just one little detail that stood out to me in terms of, weighing it.
On the other hand, he tried to resign we're told he tried to resign in response to Tywin just embarrassing her in court. And it wasn't, that seems like a really weak reason to resign, considering considering if you read all the history of Tywin and Aerys gives Tywin, just gives him shit constantly. He was dumping on him all the time. He was undermining him. He was making him look bad constantly. So maybe this was just the straw that broke the camel's back. But on the other hand, you're right. Like, in a sense, like, why wouldn't he, if it was something like rape, then
he would have just resigned.
He would have just resigned. But it didn't have to be rape.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily true that Tywin would just resign if he thought that this would cast aspersions on him. If he thought that people would find out. Tywin's a very proud man. Everybody knows that. Mm-hmm. It's one of the few things that everyone can agree on about Tywin. There's no doubt Tywin's extremely proud. Okay. He can't possibly, if he knew, rather what I'm saying is if he didn't want people to know this happened, he wouldn't make a big deal out of it, because that's worse. He would rather people not know that this whole event happened, that his wife was shamed in this way, than he would, he'd rather just carry it around and just not have people know. Because he doesn't, that's the worst thing that could happen, is people finding out. The fact that it happened one way or another is one thing, but people finding out is just way worse. That's the kind of guy Tywin is. Mm-hmm. But we're going to get into more detail.
Yeah, we gotta wrap this up. I think we might actually be a little over. But anyways, yeah.
Well, anyway, thanks for tuning in. We will be coming back with some more detailed episodes on the world of Ice and Fire, just the history of Westeros in general. And we're going to be.
You comment, tell us.
Of course, give us your favorite topics that you want to hear us talk about. We've already got a long list, but feel free to help make it longer. All right, folks. Until next time, Valar Morghulis.